Chapter 134. In a world full of Haotian's divine light, the skyscraping devil's dance should not have appeared. Facing the pressure of West Hill Taoism, especially that abbey, who can protect you? Your Majesty, the headmaster of the academy, the abbey dean, or that person? The former emperor was the Tang emperor. He only needed to say one word, and hundreds of thousands of cavalries would sweep the world and smash all the Taoist temples into scrap iron. He had the academy behind him, so he could ignore the Haotian divine light falling from the sky. But why would he turn against the West Hill divine kingdom for a saintess of the devil's doctrine? That person went to cultivate the 23-year cicada cultivation. I'm afraid that he has already forgotten you, his disciple, during the transformation. Then who can protect you? Me. But I'm just a general with brute force. I'm neither the headmaster of the academy nor the abbey dean. I don't have that kind of power. So I can only protect myself with your death. Because I need to survive, because there are more important people in my life waiting for me to protect. Many years later, in the military camp on the border between the Tang Empire and the Yen Kingdom, the general whose mane had long grown gray recalled the skyscraping devil's dance that had confused the three realms. There was no emotion on his face. It started from a letter sent by the hierarch of Haotian Taoism of the West Hill Divine Kingdom to the capital of Chang'an. In that letter, the hierarch of Haotian Taoism changed his attitude of getting along with the royal family of the Tang Empire on an equal footing and avoiding conflicts. He expressed extreme anger to the royal family on behalf of hundreds of millions of believers of Haotian Taoism. He severely accused a general of colluding with the remnants of the devil's doctrine and demanded an explanation from the royal family of the Tang Empire. At the same time that the letter was sent, three great divine priests of high status who rarely left the West Hill Divine Kingdom led countless masters of their sect to pass through Yanxi. They came to the vast Min Mountain not far from the border of the Tang Empire. The warning they expressed was very strong. If the Tang Empire did not give the believers of Haotian Taoism an explanation, then Haotian Taoism would not mind taking the risk of falling out with the Tang Empire to kill the remnant of the devil's doctrine. Not many people knew about that storm. Before the Tang imperial family could react in time, General Xiahou cruelly cooked the beautiful woman to death. Haotian Taoism was very satisfied with the explanation given by the Tang Empire, and the Tang Empire avoided another war with the world because of the woman's death. The people of the Tang Empire would never be afraid of a war with the world, but no one would be willing to shed blood for a saintess of the devil's doctrine. Therefore, only a few people who knew the inside story had been guessing whether the Tang Emperor's benevolence towards General Xiahou was to comfort him from the pain of losing his arm. This kind of speculation was not necessarily in line with the facts, but the truth of history was always hidden in the gutter at the door. If one wanted to see it, one would have to endure too much mud and stench, and no one would be willing to take the initiative to uncover it. Many years had passed in the blink of an eye. In the autumn of the 13th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire, the former saintess of the devil's doctrine, Moron Linshuang, had become the poor nameless concubine who was cooked alive in the memories of the common people. And in this autumn, there was another letter written by the hierarch of Haotian from the West Hill Divine Kingdom to the capital of the Tang Empire, Chang'an. I haven't seen that letter, but I heard that my father was very angry at that time. He tore the letter into pieces and scattered them all over the palace. On one hand, he sent eunuch Chui to the Yen territory to ask Xiahou if it was true, and on the other hand, he secretly ordered the Defender General of the state Su Shi to secretly mobilize troops, ready to attack the West Hill Divine Kingdom once they turned hostile. Princely Pei Yan of the Tang Empire looked at the letter in his hand and shook his head with a wry smile. The wrinkles at the corner of his eyes disappeared as soon as they appeared. He said angrily, "What on earth do those old Taoists want to do? Now they even ask me to deliver this letter to my brother." Although the tone is calm, Yan Suqing's death is after all the internal affairs of the empire. Even if he used to be a disciple of your West Hill, there is no reason for him to send a letter to ask about it. How can my brother not be angry? A steward of the prince's mansion stood behind him obediently and said with a smile, "Everyone knows that His Majesty doesn't like those Taoists of West Hill. The hierarch of Haotian is also the most honorable person in the world. He probably doesn't want to directly deliver a letter to His Majesty, only to be directly slapped in the face by His Majesty. That's why he asks Your Highness to deliver it." As soon as he finished speaking, the steward immediately said respectfully, "In this world, only you are qualified to mediate between His Majesty and the hierarch of Haotian." "Humph, do I want to be the messenger?" Li Peiyan sneered and said, "In the first year of Tianqi era, my brother had just ascended the throne and was inspecting the great swamp in the south. He asked me to stay in the capital city of Chang and to supervise the country. I was young and impulsive at that time, and I really believed the West Hill swindlers. As a result, my brother was very angry after that, and it took many years to ease the relationship. Everyone knew that the imperial family of the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace were at loggerheads in the secular world and the West Hill Divine Palace. But this prince could be regarded as an exception. He not only had a good relationship with the South School of Haotian in the Tang Empire, but also had occasional correspondence with the West Hill Divine Palace. The communication between the two sides started from a certain cooperation in the first year of Tianqi era. The steward looked at the prince's slightly frowning eyebrows and thought that he had served His Highness for so many years, but still could not understand why His Highness would risk His Majesty's displeasure to befriend the West Hill Divine Palace. He never dared to ask about this matter. But at this time, seeing His Highness holding the letter written by the hierarch of Haotian in a daze, he finally made up his mind. Looking out of the window, he summoned up his courage and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, there is strong support from the outside, and we will be safe inside." Hearing this, Li Peiyan was slightly startled. Then he looked at the steward who had followed him since he was a child with a faint smile. Suddenly he reached out and patted the steward's shoulder, and said in a gentle voice, "You are indeed worthy of being an old man in the mansion. You can see through my mind." After the steward left, the smile on Li Peiyan's face suddenly faded. He gently knocked on the copper bell beside the table and called a guard. After a moment of contemplation, he said in a cold voice, "There is something wrong with the steward. Inform the palace to send secret guards to keep an eye on him. No, just kill him directly." Li Peiyan said in a deep voice, "How dare he provoke the relationship between me and my brother? This kind of person can't be left alive. Then inform the military ministry and ask them to investigate how the chief steward entered the prince's mansion when I left the palace. Focus on investigating whether he has any relationship with the West Hill." After arranging these matters, His Highness stayed alone in the study for a long time. He sat at the desk and recalled what happened that year. His straight and thick eyebrows slowly knitted together. Regarding the Xianwei general's mansion and the massacre in the Yan territory, he did not think that he did anything wrong. Because he insisted that he did those things for the Tang Empire. Now the Tang Empire had countless cavalry generals, the academy, and the headmaster of the academy. Even the West Hill Divine Kingdom did not dare to show any hostility. However, the Tang Empire had to survive for thousands of years. What if the national power weakened after a few generations? The headmaster of the academy would leave this world one day. What would happen then? What if the prophecy of the 7 tomes of arcane in the temple came true? In order to maintain a good relationship with the Haotian Taoism, whose believers were all over the world, so what if some unimportant people died? As long as the foundation of the Tang Empire was not affected, he did not care about those innocent people who died. He believed that his brother would not care either. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 135. In the early autumn, the Daming Palace in the north of Chang'an City stood peacefully among the dense ancient trees. After hundreds or even thousands of years of growth, these ancient trees were extremely thick and tall. But they still could not cover the magnificence of the palace group, nor could they suppress the solemn atmosphere of the world's political center. The most beautiful place in the palace was the Qingxi Hall. Looking from the back of the hall to the back of the mountain, one could see some withered leaves falling after a few autumn winds. The green color began to mix with bright yellow and light red, which was indescribably bright and moving. The Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi, gently held the Empress's soft hand and looked at the early autumn scenery in the mountains in front of the hall. He sighed softly and said, "Trees can only reach the sky after 1,000 years of wind and rain. The Tang Empire has experienced countless wars and sacrificed countless famous generals, good ministers and warriors to achieve its current respected status. At that time, Pei Yan sacrificed the Tang people and even the generals for those Taoist priests from West Hill. I'm afraid he never thought that his actions would be so surprising in the eyes of those Taoist priests. If the Tang Empire can't resist the pressure of the outside world and casually sacrifice its ministers, then how can such a Tang Empire be qualified to shock the world? How can I not care as the Emperor of the Tang Empire?" The Empress handed the letter from West Hill back to him and gently snuggled up to him. Her beautiful eyes and brows were naturally charming and gentle. She comforted him in a low voice, "It's all in the past. Your Majesty, don't worry about it. The dead minister of the Tang Empire is still my minister. If he wasn't my brother, if not." The Emperor looked at the Empress with deep meaning and said, "How can I spare them?" The Empress knew what he wanted to say next. She slowly stood up and calmly looked at the bright autumn mountains and old trees outside the railing. She said, "When your Majesty traveled far away to Nans, the prince received the letter from the hierarch of Haotian. I'm afraid he also felt it was a little tricky. After all, Jishou Abbey finally broke the silence and spoke. Who in this world can be sure that the omen shown by the 7 tomes of arcane exists?" After a long silence, the Emperor slowly replied, "When I was studying in the academy when I was young, the headmaster of the academy once taught me that I should acknowledge the existence of things that I temporarily do not understand. Because if you do not even understand the matters of the world, why bother thinking about those things in the underworld in vain? A legend is just a legend after all. When I ascended the throne, the 3 Empyrean wayfarers from the unknown place went to the wilderness, but they didn't find any clues. If the 7 tomes of arcane in the temple really had a clear prophecy, why couldn't they find it? Since that's the case, what happened afterward was just the reckless actions of those charlatans in a panic. As for what you said about my brother being frightened back then, it's indeed possible. But he still made the most fatal mistake. He grew up under my wings and was rarely exposed to wind and rain, so he couldn't clearly see that the Tang Empire could sweep the world, ignore the West Hill Divine Palace, and even ignore the pressure from Jishou Abbey and Xiankong Temple. Other than the strength of the country in the protection of the academy, more importantly, the Tang Empire never compromised. The emperor sometimes used I and sometimes I to refer to himself. That was because each of his words referred to a different direction. The empress quietly looked at his familiar profile and noticed that he deliberately did not mention the name of the first bureau. She said, "It's not that I want to speak for the prince. It's just that this matter involves too many people and he has no choice but to be cautious. Being cautious because of an illusory legend, and sacrificing the lives of innocent officials and people for a calamity that may or may not happen." The emperor slowly frowned and then laughed at himself. He sighed and said, "I can understand many people's difficulties and pressure. This is also the reason why I didn't touch them all these years." The empress lowered her head slightly and forcibly suppressed her emotions. She said softly, "I've made things difficult for your majesty. I'm the ruler of the world. What's the big deal about bearing some criticism for my own woman?" The emperor laughed and took her into his arms. He raised his arm and pointed to the gradually dyed autumn mountains in front of the hall. He said, "Now there are many obstacles in this country. The Tang Empire's cavalry has rested for many years. If the 7 tomes of arcane in Jishou Abbey come true, it's not necessarily a bad thing. At that time, I'll lead tens of thousands of soldiers to push the Tang Empire to the other side of the world. At that time, I'll go with you to the White Bone Hall in the legend to see the autumn scenery again. I'll write an exquisite tribute to the ancestors of the Li family and fulfill the great wish of your sect for thousands of years. The Empress looked at the man's familiar profile and thought of how he had doted on and protected her all these years. Her eyes were full of admiration and love. She said softly, "Your Majesty is so ambitious. I like it very much." It said that the fish jumps into the sea. However, no matter how wide the sea is, there will always be a shore to restrain it. How can it accommodate the great wishes of the Empire and me for thousands of generations? So why can't our eyes fall on the higher, wider, and boundless sky? When the Empress heard this, she thought of the scene that she often saw in the imperial study these days. She couldn't help but lift her sleeve to cover her mouth and chuckle. She rolled her eyes and added, "The flower blooms on the shore. It seems that your Majesty really loves that piece of calligraphy. If so, in the future, if the Tang Empire can really open up its territory to the foreign world under your Majesty's leadership, you should ask the calligrapher to make a copy of it when you write a memorial to the ancestors of the Empire." That day, I wanted to give the 5 words "the fish jumps into the sea" to Cao Xiaoshu. I didn't expect that guy to leave. At that time, I was inevitably a little upset. But at that time, I saw the last 5 words that the calligrapher added for me. The Emperor bowed his head and kissed her gently on the face. He smiled and said, "These 5 words are enough to broaden the mind of an emperor. The calligrapher knows me very well. If I can find him, I must reward him heavily." The Empress looked at him with interest and said with a smile, "If your Majesty finds that person, how do you want to reward him? Do you want to invite him into the Imperial Library to be a poet?" "In my opinion, I'm afraid that the calligrapher has guessed your Majesty's thoughts. He is not willing to be trapped in the CI pavilion and live a mediocre life. That's why he refuses to show up." The Emperor thought that there was indeed such a possibility and said angrily, "It's strange. I've asked a few grand secretaries in the court with that piece of calligraphy, but none of them could find any clues from the strokes. I've also sent many people to the big study rooms in Chang and to secretly search, but they still found nothing. I really don't know where that person is hiding now. When I think that person might be an official in the court who secretly teases me when he sees me in court every day, I'm full of complaints and can't wait to find him and behead him. Your Majesty looks at and appreciates the 5 words in the imperial study every day. It can be said that you really love it. If you really find that calligrapher, I don't believe that you are willing to cut off his head." The Empress said with a smile. "Today, no more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 136. It's a pity that there are only 5 words. It's not satisfying enough. The Emperor held his wife's hand and sighed with emotion. His face was full of regret. "Furthermore, other people don't dare to say it to my face. Don't you know that if we are talking about the level of appreciation and analysis, I still have it. But if we are talking about the skill of drawing and copying, it is a bit annoying. I tried using the double hook method last night and found that I couldn't copy the charm of those 5 words." The Empress smiled and suggested, "If your Majesty really likes it, why not let the ministers in the court who are good at calligraphy try?" The Emperor patted the back of her hand and laughed heartily. Shaking his head, he said, "It looks like you still understand my intentions." After the court meeting ended, I forced those old fellows to stay. At this moment, they are locked up in the royal study copying. I told them that regardless of whether their granddaughter is 1 year old or married, if they can't copy out the first 5 words, I will not let them go. For the sake of the 5 characters, "Flowers bloom on the shore of heaven," the Tang Imperial Palace added a lot of fun. However, no matter how much the Emperor loved this book, it was just for leisure. In order to avoid being nagged by the censors, the emperor did not use the official agencies in the imperial court. He only sent people from the palace to look for it in the city of Chang'an. He also told some of the officials who were close to him and asked them to help him inquire among the people. Several months had passed. The most famous calligraphy shops in Chang'an had been searched, and the most famous calligraphers of the Tang Empire had been called to the palace to ask. But they still couldn't find the mysterious calligrapher. Even those famous calligraphers who had many students could not understand the style of the 5 words. The main reason for the current situation was still people's fixed thinking. From the emperor of Tang to the old officials who were tricked into the imperial study to the great calligraphers among the common people, they were all amazed by the skillful use of the brush, the straight and broad structure, the enchanting and proud ink momentum, and the agile and elegant charm of the scroll. In their opinion, this mysterious calligrapher must be a reclusive master who had immersed himself in the art of calligraphy for decades. Even if a person with such a marvelous ability was hidden among the common people, he must be quietly cultivating in the bookstores of aristocratic families that had been passed down for hundreds of years. It was impossible for him to set up a stall on the street to sell calligraphy. It was precisely because of this preconceived idea that no one thought of going to the fragrance workshop to ask those poor scholars who sold their calligraphy, and no one thought of inquiring about whether there were any newly opened calligraphy shops in the slums. Naturally, no one could connect the piece of calligraphy that caused a disturbance in the imperial study with the unknown old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street. One day, several tourists from the Great River Kingdom came to Lin 47th Street after visiting the Chang, an imperial palace from afar. They casually strolled into the ordinary-looking calligraphy shop at the entrance of the street. They looked at the ordinary scrolls hanging on the wall with their hands behind their back. They could not help but frown and shake their heads. When they saw a painting, their eyes suddenly lit up and they exclaimed, "Chang, and of the Tang Empire is really full of hidden talents. A random bookstore on the street can actually hide a very good ink scroll. Little girl, is your boss here?" Sang Sang was eating a bowl of chicken noodles. When she heard someone calling her, she raised her dark little face and answered with a smile, "Boss is not here. If you want to ask about the price, this painting is priced at 3,000 gold ingots, non-negotiable." An ordinary painting was priced at 3,000 gold ingots, and it was specifically stated that it was non-negotiable. What kind of style was this? This must be the style of the Great River Kingdom's sage of calligraphy, Mr. Wang, in his heyday. The tourists from the Great River Kingdom were startled when they heard this. They were so angry that they laughed. They did not bother to say anything else and left with a flick of their sleeves. It is said that the people of Chang'an are generous and hospitable. I think the people of Chang'an are so poor that they are crazy. As a certain person and a certain handmaiden had more and more silver notes on their waists, a certain person's ink scroll was getting more and more expensive, until it was unreasonably expensive. These days, the old brush pen shop could often see the shocked and speechless expressions of the customers, and could often hear the angry words of the customers before they left. Sang Sang was already familiar with this scene and even a little numb. She lowered her head and continued to eat chicken noodles. Now she finally understood that although a bowl of chicken noodles could buy 6 bowls of hot and sour noodle slice soup, the chicken soup with drops of oil was really fragrant. Ning Kei came out of the back house, playing with 2 smooth silver balls made of silver ingots. He leaned against the door of the shop like a spoiled brat and looked at the back of the customers in the middle of the street. He did not feel that he was degrading the quality of the people of Chang'an, and said mockingly, "Don't ask about the price if you can't afford it, Sang Sang. Close the door, hot pot." Spring passed, autumn came, and winter arrived. It was now the deep winter of the 13th year of the Tang Empire's Jianqi era. Ning Kei and Sang Sang had been in Chang'an for almost a year. These days, he studied in the academy and was deliberately forgotten by his classmates, so he had more time to cultivate and chat with Chen Pippi. Sang Sang stayed at Lin 47th Street every day to look after the shop whose business was getting worse. Occasionally, she would accept Li Yu's invitation to visit the princess's mansion, and the two became more and more familiar. Ning Ke could not understand the growing friendship between Her Highness and the little handmaiden. In the end, he could only attribute it to fate. After eating a fragrant hot pot and splurging 4 plates of fresh-cut mutton, Ning Ke warmed his feet and snuggled into bed. Listening to the howling wind through the cracks of the window, he rubbed his slightly cold face and said angrily, "It hasn't snowed for a long time, why is the weather so cold? Chang'an is suffering in the summer. Who is the irresponsible person who made this conclusion?" Sang Sang smiled, took off her outer coat and snuggled into the other side of the bed. She rubbed her little hands that were cold and red from the washing water and said, "Young master, you should be content. Our life now is much better than when we were in the city of Wei." This was a very sincere comment. Now that the master and the handmaiden had more than 10,000 taels of silver under their bed, and they also received a large sum of dividends from the gambling house in the western city every month. In the subtext of their hearts, it was, "We are not short of money now, too rich, too damn rich, since they had so much money, they should use it to improve their lives." Although the master and the handmaiden still had the habit of being thrifty, it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance. The hot and sour sliced noodles were replaced by shredded chicken noodle soup, and the pickled vegetable porridge was replaced by hot mutton. It was so cold a few days ago that they even built a new Kong in the house. Now they were burning silver charcoal, drinking new tea, and the house was as warm as spring. Compared with their previous life of more than 10 years, the current life was simply wonderful. Ning Ke complained about the dry and cold winter in Chang'an, but he was just saying it. Now he could finally see the mysterious cultivation world, where he could use his psyche power to control the qi of heaven and earth, spin the silver ball in his hand, and lift the pieces of paper on the table at will. Well, because the psyche power that he could export out of his body was too weak, and the qi of heaven and earth that he could control was too thin, so the pieces of paper flew more disorderly than feathers, and the silver ball spun more slowly than Chenpipi, but he really could not find any dissatisfaction. Outside the window, the north wind gradually tightened, and the night passed without a word. When they woke up the next morning, they saw endless white snow covering the streets, alleys, palaces, and buildings of Chang'an. Silver trees quietly poked out of the streets and looked at the pedestrians. Ning Ke put on a coat and stood side by side with Sang Sang at the door of the old brush pen shop. Looking at the beautiful scenery and thinking about his encounters and life in the past year, he actually saw a new meaning in the snow that he was tired of seeing in the city of Wei. "These days are really good," he praised contentedly. Sang Sang smiled and nodded beside him. They lived a peaceful and happy life in Chang'an City, without the blood of revenge and the depression of not being able to get what they wanted. They lived back and forth between the academy and the old brush pen shop. The master and the servant gradually grew up and were gradually forgotten by the people around them. Just like that, they willingly disappeared in these beautiful days. She did needlework and washed the dishes, while he wrote a scroll and looked at the books he copied from the old library. In this seemingly monotonous repetition, the hour hand began to turn again. Time slipped away peacefully. The winter solstice, the new year, and the lantern festival slipped away in the liveliness, and the mutton hot pot, hot tea, and ink slipped away in the silence. In the blink of an eye, it was another spring in the 14th year of the Tianqi era. Another spring arrived. The catkins were all over the sky. The plump figures of the Chang'an girls, who had been bound by cotton-padded jackets and fur coats for an entire winter, finally had a chance to breathe. Looking at those girls who shivered in the chilly early spring breeze but wanted to open their chests to reveal their white and tender skin, Ning Ke lifted the curtains and went to the academy with a heart full of appreciation and gratitude. After nodding to Situe Lan, who was sitting in the front row, he walked to his own table in the back. No other classmates would greet him or even look at him. He had long been accustomed to such indifference and disregard, so he did not care. After sitting down, he took out the lesson plan of etiquette and began to review it. This morning was the etiquette lesson. The etiquette instructor of classroom 3 of the academy was the associate professor of etiquette, Chao Jifeng. He was also the psyche master in the see-through state of Yan Kingdom who had beaten the grandson of the general, Chu Zhongtian, into a pig's head on the first day of the academy. No one dared to slight such an experienced and famous teacher who was ruthless and had deep feelings for the Tang children. The bell rang quietly, and Associate Professor Chao Jifeng walked in slowly. What made the students of classroom 3 feel a little strange was that the teacher had changed from his usual cold and stern demeanor. There was a hint of unconcealable joy in his old eyes. What happened next was even more unexpected to the students. Chao Jifeng looked at the students below the stage and pondered for a moment. Just when the students thought he would put down the heavy book under his armpit and start his routine criticism, he coughed lightly and stretched out his right hand and flicked it in the air a few times. Then he said seriously, "There is a change in the qi of heaven and earth today, so it is not suitable for class. Dismissed." After saying this, Chao Jifeng turned and left the study room without hesitation, leaving behind a room full of shocked and speechless students and a sudden burst of discussion. What's going on? What's wrong with the professor? Is the instructor sick? If he's sick, he should ask for sick leave from the academy. Why is he playing this trick? What do you mean by there is a change in the qi of heaven and earth today? The qi of heaven and earth changes all the time. It's not like it just started to change today. Damn, what a cruel trick. Can we use this trick even if we don't want to go to class in the future? Chu Yuxian lightly bumped Ning Kei's shoulder and said incredulously, "What kind of madness has old Chao suffered from today? How would I know?" Ning Kei was also extremely puzzled. But it was better for him not to go to class. He could spend more time in the old library. Looking at the etiquette lesson plan that was just spread out on the table, he thought to himself, "If I had known this would happen, why did I spend so much effort to organize it last night?" He shook his head and began to organize the books, preparing to leave. At this moment, someone in front of the study room said, "Didn't you see the joy on Professor Chao's face just now? That's because an important person is coming to Chang'an City today. The professor is in a hurry to go out of the city to welcome him. That's why he made such a lame excuse." What kind of important person could make old Chao so excited? I remember on the last winter solstice, the minister of the Ministry of Rites came to give consolation money to the instructors. It was 300 taels of silver. The minister. Old Chao's face was still as gloomy as if the emperor of Yan Kingdom was dead. It's inevitable for people whose country has fallen to have some resentment. What you said is too unkind. The student in front said with a smile, "As for who the important person is today and why he could make Professor Chao so excited, it actually has something to do with these things. Although Professor Chao is a senior instructor of the academy, don't forget that he is first and foremost a Yen." "What do you mean?" "The important person who is coming to Chang'an City today is Prince Long Qing of the Yen Kingdom. How could Professor Chao not be excited? Who would believe that? If he cherishes his country, he would be excited to see the royal family of his country." He stayed in the Yueluan Kingdom, the Great River Kingdom and the South Jin Kingdom for a few months, and then entered the Revelation Institute of Haotian Taoism in the West Hill Divine Kingdom to study. He became the first in his first year. There was no doubt that the academy in the south of Chang'an was the oldest, most prestigious, and most respected academy in the world. However, other countries also had their own famous academies. The Revelation Institute of the West Hill Divine Kingdom was personally taught by the Divine Hall's divine priests and was considered the best. It was naturally extraordinary to be able to stand out in such a place. However, this alone could not explain too much. At least, it could not intimidate the proud students in the academy. In the third year after Prince Long Qing entered the Revelation Institute, he followed his teacher to preach to various places. That autumn, in the Lank Temple on Hua Mountain, the instructor of the Revelation Institute and the Vedanta of the Buddhism sect debated and retreated. Prince Longqing smiled and stood up, debating with the 7 disciples of the Buddhism sect for 3 days and 3 nights, winning 7 rounds in a row. He even made the eldest disciple of the Lank Temple vomit blood and fall to the ground. In the end, the Lank Temple elder who lived in seclusion rang the bell and spoke. Only then did he smile and shut up, returning to his seat. The Lank Temple elder praised him for his profound knowledge and unparalleled debating skills. If he could enter the Buddhism sect, he would be able to understand the essence of reincarnation in less than 10 years and be guided to an unattainable place. How could the West Hill Divine Palace allow the Buddhism sect to snatch away their favorite disciple? In the 4th year after Prince Longqing entered the Revelation Institute, the hierarch of Hautian Taoism accepted him as a core disciple and even allowed him to start learning how to deal with the affairs of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. Now I heard that Prince Longqing is only 1 step away from entering the knowing destiny state and is highly valued by Hautian Taoism. He is already the 2nd most powerful person in the judicial department, specializing in guarding against the heterodox demons. He has great authority. The 2nd most powerful person in the judicial department of the Divine Hall. A student gasped and said, "Such a bigwig can't do much in the Tang Empire, but if he were in the South Jin Kingdom or the Great River Kingdom, even the Emperor would not dare to disobey him." Then why did he come to the Tang Empire, to Chang'an? Because Prince Longqing wants to enter our academy to study. Enter the academy? Would such a bigwig come to be our classmate? You wish. Such a bigwig has been studying in the Revelation Institute for many years and is now an important figure in the West Hill Divine Palace. How could he be our classmate? Of course, his purpose of entering the academy is to enter the 2nd floor. He came to Chang and this time not only to enter the 2nd floor to continue his study, but also to replace his brother, the Crown Prince of Yen, as a hostage. The Emperor of Yen is getting older and weaker, and no one knows when he will pass away. His Majesty values filial piety and agreed to let the Crown Prince of Yen return to Chang and to take care of his parents, but asked the Yen Kingdom to replace him with an important member of the royal family. After thinking about it, who else is qualified except for Prince Longqing? The West Hill Divine Palace has cultivated Prince Longqing for many years, and it has proven that he is indeed very talented. The Yen Kingdom values his talent and his close relationship with the West Hill Divine Palace. They see him as the hope of the Yen Kingdom's revival. In their eyes, this prince is much more important than the Crown Prince who has been a hostage in Chang'an for many years. So what I don't understand is why the Yen Kingdom actually agreed to the Tang Empire's request this time. Through the introductions and compliments of the dozen or so students from prestigious families, a clear picture gradually formed in the minds of the academy students, a young member of the royal family, a young cultivator who was about to enter the knowing destiny state, carrying the hope of the Yen Kingdom's revival, and an important person to be cultivated by the West Hill Divine Palace. Who else could such a person be but a talent of the mandate of heaven? Thinking of Prince Longqing's elegance, the young and proud students in the study room could not help but have extremely complicated feelings. Some were envious, some admired, and some were indistinct. But this indistinctness had no power in front of the other party's dazzling history and reputation. For a moment, the study room became strangely quiet. Chu Yuxian looked at his classmates and added with a smile, "You have forgotten the most famous thing about Prince Longqing. You should know that this prince is extremely handsome, and some even describe him as beautiful. In addition, he is well educated and has a magnificent temperament. When he first entered the Yueluan kingdom in his youth, he attracted the attention of countless young girls in the Yueluan kingdom. It is said that on that day, many pairs of embroidered shoes were trampled, and many girls' voices were broken by his cries, and many pairs of eyes were red from crying. This was a very famous anecdote. Of course, the students in the study room knew about it. But most of the young men who spoke with confidence and composure were willing to mention this part. Now that Chu Yuxian said this, the young girls sitting in the front row of the study room suddenly thought of this rumor. Their youthful faces suddenly lit up. Even Miss Gao, who had been a little depressed recently, opened her eyes wide and unconsciously raised the corner of her mouth slightly. I say, sisters, it is too late for you to be infatuated now. Chu Yuxian was best at stabbing once and then stabbing again. He looked at the girls with a sneaky smile and said, Prince Long Qing has long been engaged to Princess Lu Qinjia of the Yueluan Kingdom. She is also the most famous infatuated girl in the world. Back when Prince Long Qing was studying Buddhism in the Yueluan Kingdom, he fell in love with Princess Lu Qinjia at first sight. Later on, this princess traveled thousands of miles to the Revelation Institute to study, just to spend time with Prince Long Qing. How would you have the chance? Everyone knows that Lu Qinjia is infatuated with flowers. You are no match for her at all. When the girls in the study room heard this, their expressions became somewhat awkward. But could they still argue with Chu Yoxian's words? They could only purse their lips and lower their heads in grievance. When Situilan saw the expressions of her female companions, she could not help but frown and talk about other topics, diluting the lovesickness in the study room. Lu Qinjia, the flower addict of the Yueluan Kingdom, was a famous beauty in the world. Other than that, there were two other girls in the world who were compared to her. One of them was the last female disciple of the great calligrapher of the Great River Kingdom. It was said that she was extremely gentle and virtuous. She loved calligraphy, so she was called the calligraphy addict. The other was a mysterious female disciple of the Revelation Institute of West Hill. It was said that she was extremely gentle and beautiful, but her heart was focused on Taoism. Other than cultivation, she had no other thoughts. She was called the Tao addict. Speaking of which, both the flower addict and the calligraphy addict know her name. It is just that the Tao addict has always been extremely mysterious. The world only knows that there is such a beauty in the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but they do not know her name or where she is now. Situilan listened to the curious discussion of her classmates. After a moment of hesitation, she said, Indeed, not many people know the name of the Tao addict. But I heard that she is now the #1 figure in the judicial department of the Divine Hall. I'm alive again. It turns out that adjusting for jet lag is also very painful. Getting up at 6 o'clock is not something a human should do. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 137. In the previous chapter, I wrote the words, rare genius. Well, I have talked too much with Zhang Xiaohua recently. My poor math skills have been influenced by this famous math addict to be worse. Another thing to tell you, I have used the word ink scroll many times before. I know what it means, but I think this Tang is not the Tang dynasty, and this ink scroll is not the Tang dynasty. But there are too many places in today's chapter, so I feel something is wrong and easy to be criticized. So I changed all the ink scroll that should be changed into writing sections. Of course, this is in my manuscript, and I didn't change it in the VIP section. I am lazy. I have a rest tomorrow. The rumored beauty Tao addict was actually the top figure in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. Hearing this, the noisy study room suddenly became silent. All the students looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. What kind of charming woman was she? How could she suppress Prince Long Qing? Don't doubt it. Do you really think that women are born inferior to men? Situilan looked at the expressions of her classmates and knew that some of them did not believe it. She could not help but frown and said, that beauty Tao addict is very mysterious and rarely shows herself in public. It is natural that people do not know her ability. But I have heard that Prince Long Qing does not show any dissatisfaction whenever he mentions his superior. That beauty Tao addict should be very young, right? An academy student sighed and said, the West Hill Divine Kingdom is really a place shown by the glory of Haotian. It actually has so many young geniuses. Not to mention that Tao addict. After Prince Longqing enters the academy, where can we find someone who can compete with him? Jean Wuxia listened to this and slightly frowned. She wanted to say something, but finally did not speak. A female companion next to her looked at her expression and said for her with a smile, "Our academy has such a person like Mr. Xia. Can't we take him out to compete with Prince Longqing?" Mr. Xie just entered the no doubt state at the beginning of last autumn, while Prince Longqing is only one step away from the knowing destiny state. No matter how I think about it, he should be a powerhouse in the upper see-through state. There are at least 5 levels between them. How can they compete? That student did not give face to his female classmates. He sneered and said, "And even if Mr. Xie can beat Prince Longqing in poetry and mathematics, don't forget that he is from the South Jin Kingdom. What does he have to do with the Tang Empire? Who said the Tang Empire does not have talents?" Situilan frowned and said, "Wang Jinglu is said to be invincible below the knowing destiny state. He is at most a few years older than Prince Longqing. As long as Prince Longqing hasn't entered the knowing destiny state, he won't be able to defeat Wang Jinglu." That student frowned and said, "Wang Jinglu is indeed qualified to be compared with Prince Longqing. But he has not appeared for a long time. I don't know where he has gone." Chu Zhongtian glanced at Situilan. Seeing that she did not object, he smiled and said to his classmates, "I heard that Wang Jinglu was sent by His Majesty to work for the Defender General of the state. Even if Prince Longqing came to Chang'an, he could not violate the military discipline and come back to do anything. So we'd better forget about this person." Ning Ke had been quietly listening to the discussion of the students behind the study room. He found that no one mentioned Prince Longqing again. Instead, they talked about the talent problem of the Tang Empire. So he did not continue to listen. He simply packed up his things and was ready to leave the study room for the old library. Even if we don't mention Wang Jinglu, there will still be other talents in the Tang Empire. Probably because Xie Qingyun was directly considered not to be comparable with Prince Longqing, Jean Wuxia's mood was a little strange. She stood up and looked at her classmates with a smile and said softly, "Not only those who cultivate Taoism can be called talents. As long as they are proficient in military, arithmetic, essays, poetry and calligraphy, they are all talents. I heard from my grandfather that the palace has recently made a big noise because of a calligraphy section. His Majesty loves that calligraphy very much. Grandfather also said that the calligrapher is a great talent in calligraphy. Can't such a person be regarded as a talent of the Tang Empire? I've also heard about this." Chen Zixian, the young master of the bookstore, glanced at Jean Wuxia and mumbled, "Several groups of people from the palace have come to ask my father, but they really don't know who wrote that calligraphy. But I heard from the eunuchs in the palace that Libationer and several great calligraphers all confirmed that the mysterious calligrapher must have been immersed in calligraphy for many years, so that he could have that kind of writing strength structure. This can't be regarded as a talent of the young generation, right?" Jean Wuxia just wanted to bypass the previous topic, so she naturally wouldn't answer this. She smiled gently and lightly changed the topic, asking, "Grandfather copied that section in the Imperial Study a month ago, how about your family?" "My family runs a bookstore, how can it compare with Miss Wuxia's family?" Chen Zixian replied with a smile, "It's just that the palace urged me, so my family helped to contact 2 great calligraphers to enter the palace to copy 2 scrolls." The topics of chatting among the students in the academy had always been irregular. Today, Professor Chao Jifeng gave everyone a holiday, so they had a lot of time to chat, so the topic naturally changed very quickly. Previously, they were still talking about Prince Longqing and the Tao addict beauty, but now, everyone's attention was completely attracted by the legendary calligraphy section. After a few discussions, the students were surprised to find that everyone actually knew about this matter. That calligraphy section had already become the focus of discussion of the upper class in Chang'an City in recent months. A calligraphy section that no one knew who wrote and why it appeared in the imperial study made His Majesty love it so much that he directly ordered the ministers and calligraphers to copy it in person. If one didn't know the ins and outs of this matter, and didn't know what was written on the calligraphy section, then there was no way for one to participate in the tea-drinking and chit-chatting of the departments and yamen. His Majesty rewarded grandfather with a copy of the imperial calligraphy, but it's a pity that grandfather didn't let me see it. Jean Wuxia said softly. In fact, the whole Chang'an city knew that the Tang Emperor loved calligraphy, but his writing strength was not good. The students tried hard to hold back their laughter, thinking that Libationer naturally couldn't bear to see His Majesty's imperial calligraphy being seen by others. Miss Gao, who had never talked much, at this time, hearing Jean Wuxia's gentle and soft words, somehow felt a little unhappy. She said with a little bit of pride, "My family was also given a copy, but it's a pity that it's not the imperial calligraphy, but it uses the double hook method, which is said to be very similar to the original." The double hook method was a method of copying. It hooked out with a thin line along the two sides of the original, and then filled the outline with ink. The finished product produced by this method of copying was very close to the original, so it was quite precious and was often used to copy famous works. Listening to Miss Gao's words, the students were once again surprised. They praised that the unknown calligraphy section was indeed deeply favored by His Majesty. They also secretly discussed that there was someone in the palace whose family was indeed deeply favored by His Majesty. They were actually able to receive the double-hook copybook. What the emperor liked must be even more, not to mention what the Tang Emperor liked. Therefore, in recent years, the whole Tang Empire loved calligraphy very much, and calligraphers were highly respected. Now that the noble houses in Chang'an city all knew that His Majesty liked that section, it was inevitable that they would compare with each other. Those who were given a copy by His Majesty would be complacent, while those who were not given a copy by His Majesty would be a little anxious. Even those who had been given a copy by His Majesty would still compare the version. It was really a small section, but it wrinkled the ink in the inkstone of many mansions and disturbed the mood of many nobles. Some commoners who stayed in the academy at night curiously asked Miss Gao what was written on the section, and what charm did the words have that could make His Majesty so happy. Since Miss Gao had already opened her mouth, she naturally had to continue. She smiled slightly and kept praising the calligraphy as if it could not be found on earth or heaven. Excuse me. Ning Ke walked out from the back of the study room with a few books under his armpit. When the crowd found him, they immediately stopped talking indifferently according to their usual habit. It was not until he walked out of the study room and into the rain-shielding corridor that they began to talk about the section again. Naturally, no one was willing to point out the flaws of the calligraphy that the emperor loved so much that he could not bear to part with. Furthermore, the calligraphy was truly exquisite. As a result, all the ministers and calligraphers who had seen the original work praised and sighed in accordance with the emperor's wishes. Although Miss Gao's words were slightly exaggerated, none of her classmates expressed any doubts. Jean Wuxia knew why Miss Gao had said those words before. She smiled slightly and did not contradict her. Instead, she went along with Miss Gao's words and very sincerely praised the section. Following that, the topic of discussion shifted to the most mysterious and fascinating aspect of this matter: who was the author of this piece of calligraphy? Who wrote it? Until now, no one knows. I heard that it appeared in the imperial study last spring, and then the palace searched for it for more than half a year. Those great calligraphers were all questioned, but no one admitted it. Do you think that it could be written by those scholars who sell calligraphy in the fragrance workshop? Don't look at me like that. There are many heroes in the wilderness, and talents are always in the mountains. Who says that those scholars who sell calligraphy can't write peerless works? You're right. But if it's the work of those poor calligraphers, why did he secretly send this section to the imperial study? If he could get to the palace, why would he be so poor? This is really a mystery. I don't know why the calligrapher has never stood up to admit it. You know that His Majesty admires him so much, and now he has caused such a disturbance in the court. As long as he is willing to show up, no one will pursue his crime. On the contrary, there must be a lot of wealth waiting for him. Jean Wuxia frowned slightly and said after thinking for a moment, I think it's really possible that the calligrapher lives in a small calligraphy and painting shop in the streets of Chang'an. According to the palace, the calligrapher has never shown up after searching for such a long time. It's very likely that the place where he lives can't hear these rumors. Moreover, the palace must be looking for famous calligraphy and painting shops in Chang'an City, so they can't think of that place for a while. As for why the calligrapher's section could enter the imperial study, we don't know. She smiled gently and said a possibility, maybe a minister in the court cherished that poor calligrapher, so he secretly brought it to the palace and deliberately left it in the imperial study, just to let His Majesty find it. But if it's really so, that minister should have made it clear by now, right? The students felt that what she said was reasonable, so they replied with a smile, if it's really a small shop in a shabby alley, we can also look for it after school. If we can really find that calligrapher, maybe the palace will reward us. Chen Zixian timidly interrupted, I heard that. Ning Ke opened a small calligraphy and painting shop in the eastern city. The students were stunned when they heard this, and then they all laughed out, thinking that this idea was really absurd and ridiculous. A student from Yangwan who was familiar with Zhongdajuan looked at the disappearing figure of Ning Ke at the end of the rain-shielding corridor and laughed, if the section in the imperial study was written by this guy, then I'm willing to kiss his stinky feet. Laughter sounded in the study room again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 138. Listening to her classmates making fun of Ning Ke, Situelan stood up unhappily and pulled Jean Wuxia out of the study room. She looked at her seriously and wanted to remind her, but thinking that her companion was gentle and had nothing to do with this matter, she sighed and asked, Are you going to watch the fun this afternoon? Jean Wuxia smiled and replied, You mean Prince Longqing will enter Chang'an City? Yes, I have no interest in this kind of man, but I am a little curious after all. Situelan said with a smile. Then I will go with you. Go to the building of pines and cranes and ask for a room. We should be able to see the long street. Situelan looked at her jokingly and said, Why do you have time today? You don't need to accompany that great scholar. If you really want to see Prince Longqing and don't want to leave Xie Qingyun alone, you might as well take him with you. Prince Longqing will enter the city, of course he won't go. Jean Wuxia said with a smile, Young men always have their own pride, not to mention him. Thinking of Ning Ke's experience these days, Situelan said with some disdain, So what? Should Xie Qingyun be born more proud? Associate Professor Chao Jifeng went out of the city to welcome the revival of his country. Many students of the academy were discussing whether they should go to Chang'an City to watch the fun. Ning Ke, who was walking in the rain-shielding corridor, was full of cultivation and didn't even hear his classmates talking about the calligraphy, let alone think of joining the fun. But thinking that Prince Longqing had caused such a sensation in Chang'an City before he arrived, he could not help but feel a little envious and admiring. But there was not too much shock in this kind of envy and admiration. A bigwig of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. A genius who was about to step into the knowing destiny state. This kind of brilliance might be really shocking to others. However, he had been hanging out with Chen Pipi every day, a guy who had reached the knowing destiny state at the age of 16. He really could not see what was so great about this so-called peerless cultivation genius, who was praised by the world. He just had 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth. It was just that he would make a bigger splash when he jumped into the water because he was too fat and stupid. When he first entered Chang, and in the 13th year of the Tianqi era, he met people like Chao Xiaoshu and Chen Pipi. The world before Ning Ke's eyes suddenly widened. His vision was different, so his bearing was naturally different. It was difficult for people like Prince Longqing, who was famous all over the world and shocked the students of the academy, to arouse too much emotion in him. Entering the old library, he saluted the female professor respectfully and read the book of Haran's sword quietly, letting the spring sun gradually tilt and sink outside the west window. When the female professor left at night, the bookshelf gently slid again. Prince Longqing came to Changpan today. Ning Ke reminded Chen Pipi. Chen Pipi looked confused. He scratched his head and asked, "Who is Prince Longqing?" Ning Ke was surprised and asked, "You don't know Prince Longqing? Why do I have to know a prince?" Chen Pipi sat down with difficulty and took the small flagon that Ning Ke handed to him. He took a sip and said, "Is this person very famous?" "Quite." Ning Ke stared at his eyes and said, "He is the Prince of Yen Kingdom and the number 2 figure in the Judicial Department of West Hill Divine Palace. He is also regarded as a cultivation genius like you, so there is no reason that you don't know him." "Judicial Department?" Chen Pipi shrugged and the fat under his cheeks trembled. He replied indifferently, "So what? There are too many idiots who call themselves geniuses in West Hill. Do I have to know every Tom, Dick, or Harry?" Ning Ke looked at him in confusion and surprise and asked, "Didn't you say that you are the successor of West Hill Divine Palace? Even if you have left West Hill for many years, how can you not even know such a person? That is all your blind guess. When did I admit that I am the successor of West Hill Divine Palace?" Chen Pipi put down the flagon and said angrily, "If you insist on thinking so, then there is only something wrong with your IQ. You are not the successor of West Hill Divine Palace." Ning Ke quickly calmed down and looked at him with a smile. He said, "What a pity, what a pity. I was going to ride on your coattails." Chen Pipi was shocked and asked, "When did you show enough respect to a genius like me, so that I can judge that you want to ride on my coattails?" It was just a joke between friends, so no one took it seriously. Ning Ke suddenly thought of something and asked confusedly, "Speaking of which, the relationship between Tang Empire and West Hill is really bad. In the whole world, only these two have the ability and qualification to be each other's opponents. It is not wrong to say that we are hidden enemies. In this case, why does the Academy still accept a guy from West Hill Divine Palace? Aren't you worried that West Hill Divine Palace will peep at your secrets? The Academy never recruits students based on their background, but only on their ability and temperament. This is the so-called education without discrimination. The headmaster of Academy even dares to accept a person like me as an ordinary student, not to mention the number 2 figure of the Judicial Department of Divine Hall." Chen Pipi sneered and then changed the topic. He looked at Ning Ke seriously and said, "The Judicial Department of Divine Hall specializes in suppressing heretics. They are extremely powerful and cruel. The people in it are crazy and crazy. They are not easy to deal with." Ning Ke glanced at him and said with emotion, "So, I am probably misled by you, a rare knowing destiny state master who has no style of a master." Chen Pipi was furious. He gritted his teeth and scolded, "What do you mean? You mean I don't have the style of a master?" Ning Ke laughed and said, "Not only do you not have the style of a master, but the most important thing is your temperament. Do you understand temperament? It has nothing to do with your fat figure or your boring talk. It is purely a feeling." Chen Pipi said angrily, "State is state. What does it have to do with temperament and temperament? If I can enter the knowing destiny state, then I am in the knowing destiny state. Then I can completely ignore the existence of the upper grade of see-through state. There is no proof." Ning Ke said awkwardly, "You said you are a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state. What proof do you have?" Looking at the evil smile on Chen Pipi's face, Ning Ke was shocked and quickly said, "Don't think about beating me to prove that you are strong. You often say that I am a cultivation idiot. Then what can winning against a cultivation idiot prove? How can you prove it? Chen Pipi innocently spread his hands and asked, you find a master in the upper grade of see-through state and I will bully him? That's a good suggestion. Ning Ke said with a smile, do you know Chao Jifeng, the associate professor of the Department of Etiquette? I heard that he is a psyche master in the see-through state. How about this opponent? Beating the instructor. Chen Pipi stared at him and said, do you want me to be beaten by second brother and hung on the wall? Ning Ke pretended to think seriously for a moment and said, it is indeed inappropriate to beat the instructor. How about this, Prince Long Qing comes to Chang'an. Although he is a bigwig in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace, he is just a nobody in your eyes. Coincidentally, he is only one step away from the destiny state, so he is suitable to be used as proof. This proof seems to be really good. Chen Pipi frowned and was thinking about how to sneak out of the back mountain without second brother's knowledge and fight with the prince in Chang'an. Suddenly, he understood and stared at Ning Ke with his soybean-sized eyes. He said with hatred, isn't this a bit wrong? Did you get agitated in the study room and deliberately pick a fight? I have never been a person to pick a fight. Ning Ke's evil intention was directly exposed by him, but there was no shame on his face. He said confidently, you always say that you are a peerless cultivation genius. Now there is another cultivation genius in Chang'an City, and no one knows you at all. On the contrary, everyone admits that Prince Long Qing is the real genius. Then how can you be considered peerless? If I were you, how could I swallow it? I don't want you to embarrass him in front of everyone, but at least you should tell the god's favored son that the real genius can only be qualified to call himself at your state. Come on. Chen Pipi glared at him and said, only now do I believe that the stories you told me before were true. If you hadn't grown up in such a dangerous and filthy environment, how could you have been raised into such a person? You're so young, but your heart is so sinister. Hearing this, Ning Ke laughed and stopped picking a fight. He was really curious about Chen Pipi's state and means. He lowered his voice and suggested, how about you show it? Chen Pipi looked at him as if he was looking at a ghost and said incredulously, show the ability of the knowing destiny state. Ning Ke, we are cultivators who are respected by the world, not monkeys who perform in the streets and alleys. Of course you're not a monkey, and I'm not a performer who whips monkeys. There's no audience in this old library. How can it be reduced to a performer? Show me your realm and take it as pointing the way for me. The more Chen Pipi refused to show his state, the more curious Ning Ke was, so he kept persuading him. When he mentioned the words, guiding the way, it was precisely Chen Pipi's weakness. To this friend of similar age, Chen Pipi clearly had a much higher realm than the other party, but he had never obtained the corresponding sense of pride. The other party had never shown any expression of shock or admiration. It was only at this moment that he finally seemed to admit defeat. Not in the old library. After thinking for a moment, Chen Pipi explained very seriously, the books upstairs are all transcribed by the Academy's previous masters. Every word is a divine talisman. If I show my knowing destiny state skills in the library, once I cause the divine talisman to backfire, not to mention me, even second brother can't withstand it. Among the 5 states of cultivation, the knowing destiny state was the most mysterious and highest state. Ning Ke knew this from Liu Qingchen on the journey back from the frontier fortress. He was just a beginner in cultivation, and there was a huge gap between him and the knowing destiny state. Just like ants would never envy eagles flying high, he had no interest in the knowing destiny state. Therefore, although he knew there was a young genius in the knowing destiny state beside him, he had never thought of experiencing the magic and mystery of the knowing destiny state. Until today, when he heard that Prince Long Qing had come to Chang'an City and that his classmates, who usually ignored him, were excitedly talking about the god's favored one, he, who was still a teenager, began to face those distant realms for the first time. Because of envy, jealousy, and of course, a little bit of resentment. He had no such feelings towards Chinpipi, who had already entered the knowing destiny state, because Chinpipi was his friend and had saved his life once. However, he had some conflict and disgust towards the talented young man who had always been superior since he was born, just like the Son of God. Perhaps it was the outburst of the hatred of the grassroots towards the rich. Unfortunately, no matter how he persuaded, Chinpipi still refused to show him the magic skills of the knowing destiny state. As the spring night deepened, he thought that Sang Sang was still waiting for him at home, so he had to go downstairs resentfully. Just as he walked past the edge of the wetland and was about to enter the academy's buildings, he suddenly stopped and stared at the shallow ripples of the water plants under the starlight. Gradually, a strong expression of shock appeared on his face. The wetland of the academy was very shallow and very clear. Walking by the lake in the daytime, one could clearly see countless red carps and black shuttles swimming among the water plants. The fish and the grass were very beautiful. If walking by the lake in the middle of the night, when the starlight was shining, one could even see the scales of the fish reflecting the starlight and twinkling in the wetland, weaving an illusory starry sky that was denser and more beautiful than the night sky. Ning Ke went to the old library every day and often left only when the sun was swallowed up by the mountain behind the academy. Therefore, he was very familiar with the wetland and the beautiful pictures of the fish in the pond during the day and night. However, tonight, he suddenly found that the familiar wetland was a little different from usual. The starlight reflected by the weeds in the wetland seemed to be a little dimmer than usual. Ning Ke fixed his eyes on it and saw that the koi carps and black shuttles, which were supposed to be swimming happily among the weeds, were suspended in the water for some reason. They were completely motionless and had turned into fish carved from jade of various colors. Since the fish were motionless, the starlight naturally did not shine anymore. Therefore, the wetland was much more peaceful and dim than usual. What kind of power could make the fish stay motionless among the water plants like stars hanging in the night sky? This kind of stillness was not death or simple solidification. Through the water waves and grass, one could still feel the aura of life, as if these fish had just left a virtual projection in the water, while their bodies had swum to another world that was connected to the real world during this period of time. Was this almost miraculous scene a sign of the state of knowing destiny? After a long time, Ning Ke slowly came to his senses. He turned his stiff neck with difficulty and looked at the old library behind him, watching the familiar figure disappearing by the window. With a light snap, a black fish with only a bright red tail happily swam out of the water plants, jumped out of the water, took a bite of the starlight, and then fell back into the pond, completely unaware of what had happened before. When returning to Lin 47th Street, Ning Ke still remained silent. The magical scene he had seen in the academy had gone beyond his imagination. Therefore, his mood was extremely complicated at this time. He was shocked and a little confused, but this confusion turned into a faint depression and a strong desire. His mind was preoccupied with those things, so he didn't notice that Lin 47th Street was rather lively today. Wu Lauer, who ran an antique shop next door, was describing some scene to his neighbors under the big pagoda tree. Wu Lauer's fierce wife, for some reason, had changed her temperament today. She didn't stop her husband from gesticulating, but just covered her mouth and giggled at the side, the thick makeup on her face rustling and falling. Tut tut, it seems that the state of knowing destiny is really amazing. He didn't know how he did it. Why were the fishes so obediently not moving? It looked like a magic trick from a year ago. Those fish lined up like soldiers and moved forward. But the old library is so far away from the wetland, there is no way to perform magic, right? Liu Qingchen once told me that the cultivators of knowing destiny state could essentially grasp the operating rules of the qi of heaven and earth, and understand the origin of the world. But, isn't the origin of the world particles? It froze those fish, but they were still alive and kicking after they recovered. It looks like a fresh-keeping refrigerator. After entering the shop, he closed the door, sat on the round chair, and kept muttering to himself with his hands resting on his cheeks. After a long while, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. After thinking for a long time, he realized that he did not hear Sang Sang's voice when he got home today, nor did he drink hot tea immediately. Moreover, if he had said so much in the past, the girl would have started to mutter that the young master had started to talk nonsense again, but she did not do so today. Ning Kei looked up in surprise, and found that Sang Sang was sitting at the desk, staring at a point in the sky and giggling. Her hair was a little disheveled, and she looked like the legendary silly girl. Are you bewitched? Hearing this, Sang Sang suddenly woke up and stood up in a panic. She looked at him and said, "Young master, when did you come back?" Ning Kei said angrily, "Young master, I have been back for an hour. It doesn't matter if I am ignored by those ignorant kids in the academy, but do I have to enjoy this kind of treatment at home?" Sang Sang's dark face showed shame, and she hurried to pour tea for him. Ning Kei suddenly thought of the hot topic in the academy today. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the back of the little handmaiden. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "Did you also go to watch the fun today?" Sang Sang poured half of the tea that had been brewed, and then poured hot water into it. She brought it to her lips and gently dipped it in the hot water. After finding that the tea was warm to Ning Kei's taste, she brought it to him and said shyly, "During the day, there was no business anyway, and sister-in-law Wu kept asking me to watch, so I went to have a look." Ning Kei gasped and looked at her little face incredulously. He thought that Prince Long Qing was so charming that even Sang Sang, a 12-year-old handmaiden, was bewitched like this. Sang Sang misunderstood his look and hurriedly rearranged her fluffy hair. She seriously explained, "Prince Long Qing's carriage did not take the Vermilion Bird Avenue, but the Tong Nan Avenue. The street was narrow and there were many people, so it was too crowded and my hair was squeezed. But young master, don't worry, I didn't bring any silver when I went there, so I am not afraid of being stolen." "Is that what I am worried about?" Ning Kei angrily reprimanded. "Then what are you worried about, young master?" Sang Sang opened her willowy eyes and asked curiously. Ning Kei touched his head and wondered what he was worried about and angry about. After thinking for a while, he still could not figure it out, so he did not bother to think about it anymore. He looked up and down at the little girl and teased, "I didn't expect that there would be a day when my Sang Sang would be smitten. But let me tell you some bad news, that prince has a fiancée." Sang Sang stared at him and said, "Young master, didn't you say that I can't get married until I'm 16? I'm only 13 and a half now, how could I think about getting married? If you ask me, you won't even mature at 16. Ning Kei raised his hand and poked her smooth little forehead. He said, "Look at your idiotic look just now. You're only 13 and a half years old and you're already thinking about love. Don't you feel ashamed? I just followed Aunt Wu to watch the fun." Sang Sang slightly lowered her head and explained in a low voice with some lack of confidence. "Prince Long Qing is really good-looking. I can't think of a suitable chapter name, so it is untitled, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 139. Ning Kei remembered that little Sang Sang had also stared at the Xia family head in a daze when the results of the academy's entrance exam were released last year. Only then did he realize that this girl was just like him, a mortal who valued appearance above all else. But why had she never stared at him in a daze? That was naturally because his appearance was too ordinary. Thinking of this, he looked at her and said gloomily, "Men who are too good-looking are usually not smart, such as that Prince Long Qing." Sang Sang rested her little black face on her slender arms and said absent-mindedly, "Young master, I just want to see how his face is made and why it is so good-looking. I don't know which cosmetics brand he uses, Chenjinji Cosmetics Store or Yuziyuan Cosmetics Store. Alas, it would be great if I could have a chance to see him up close, and it would be even better if I could touch his eyebrows. Ning Ke looked at her absent-minded look and suddenly realized that his little handmaiden seemed to have no hobbies or pleasures over these years, except for running the household chores. He felt a burst of pity in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, Prince Long Qing will enter the second floor of the academy. If you want to see him up close, I can take you there and you can cheer for me on the way. Great! Great! Sang Sang clapped her little hands and sat up straight. Then she looked at Ning Ke's face and very seriously corrected him, but I will definitely go there to cheer for you that day, young master, and just to see him on the way. That's more like it, good girl. Ning Ke smiled and rubbed her head. Then he walked to the back of the house with his hands clasped behind his back, thinking that no matter for his own life or for the little handmaiden's dream, he had to climb to the second floor. Another spring came. Willow catkins flew all over the sky, drifting over the market wells, the quiet and secluded residences in Southern City, the lively Vermilion Bird Avenue, and the high Vermilion Palace walls. They naughtily twitched on the tips of the beast noses on the eaves, and then gently fell to the ground, sticking the wet ground of the laundry office into a thin piece of felt. I was wrong, I was really wrong. If I had been a little more courageous when His Majesty asked me last year and agreed directly, I wouldn't be so hesitant now. I'm looking at a mountain of treasures, but I don't dare to reach out to touch it. The rich Hebei accent reverberated in the sky full of willow catkins. The slightly plump deputy commander of the Tang Imperial Guards, Su Chongshan, stood under the railing of the side hall with his hands tucked in his sleeves. He looked at the officials who walked out of the imperial study with joy and pride on their faces. He looked at the copies in their hands as if they were treasures. The disdain and contempt in his eyes gradually turned into bitterness and regret, as if he missed his first love in his hometown. Tell me, why does an uncouth fellow have to learn from those ministers and play tricks? Now, he had screwed up, hadn't he? He hurt his instep so much. Now the more His Majesty likes it, the more trouble it will cause, and the more I dare not to admit that I lied to His Majesty at that time. This is really a big mistake. The little eunuch Lu Ji raised his head and glanced at the commander's expression. He lowered his voice and suggested, Sir, we have been watching for several months. No matter how well Ning Ke hid it, the imperial court will dig it out one day. At that time, not only will we be punished for lying to the emperor, but our bodyguard office will also not get any benefits. Why don't we, just take a gamble? What gamble? Su Chongshan snorted coldly and said, His Majesty likes it, Her Majesty likes it, and I don't know whether those ministers really like it or not. But anyway, His Majesty has been disappointed for so long. When he finally finds out that we have been hiding it from him for so long, all his disappointment and liking will turn into anger towards you and me. At that time, Ning Ke won't have any trouble, but you or me will bear the responsibility. When it came to serious business, the deputy commander's Hebei accent became much lighter. He did not say, but I. Lu Ji did not dare to answer. He rolled his eyes and thought, if there really comes a day, I, a little eunuch, will be the one to take the blame. This matter. I have to find a way to break out of this situation. Lu Ji. Who do you think His Majesty trusts the most in the palace besides Her Majesty? Su Chongshan suddenly said. Lu Ji was shocked and understood that the deputy commander had seen through his thoughts. He bowed with a sad face and thought for a long time before he tentatively said, the Master of Nation. I don't care what you do about this matter, but you have to do it properly. Through the Master of Nation, let His Majesty know who wrote that calligraphy is, but you have to get the bodyguard office out of this matter. Su Chongshan said lightly and then walked towards the palace gate. Lu Ji had taken over such a hot potato. How could he just watch his lord leave without getting involved? With an anxious face, he followed up and said in a low voice, Lord Commander, it's easy to talk about it, but how are we going to pick it? If I knew how to get rid of it, why would I let you think about it? Su Chongshan looked back and glared at him. He said angrily, I'm busy with official business every day. How can I have time to do these little things? It's not some magic weapon or talisman. It's just a piece of lousy calligraphy. How could it make such a big noise? That Prince Long Qing is also a trouble. He even needs me to send troops to Peach Alley to suppress him. He's just a lousy and beautiful young man. Why are all the girls in Chang'an crazy? The commander flicked his sleeves and left. He faintly heard his complaining voice among the catkins, the world is so messy. The peach blossoms in Peach Alley in Chang'an had not yet bloomed. The peach blossoms outside the Jingyuan Cemetery in the suburbs of the city had just borne numerous pink buds. The Jingyuan Cemetery was located among the green forests and secluded mountains. Those who were qualified to be buried here were basically officials of the Tang Empire or wealthy businessmen and celebrities. It was the season to go hiking and sweep graves. The cemetery was surrounded by smoke that could not be blown away by the wind. The ashes of paper money that were still warm were piled up in front of the fire screen at the edge of the forest. A tall and thin middle-aged man in a gray robe stood on the top of the cemetery and looked down quietly. He waited for the people in front of the stone grave to leave before he slowly walked down. Looking at the glorious resume of Zhang Yiqi, the censor of the Tang Empire, on the tombstone, the middle-aged man in a gray robe was silent for a moment. Then he walked to the side of the grave and slowly stroked the freshly pulled grass with his right hand. The surface of his palm was very close to the fresh grass and stubble, but did not completely touch. The tall and thin middle-aged man in a gray robe was Lin Ling, a master in the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. He was a psyche master in the see-through state. He arrived in Chang'an at the beginning of last winter and began to secretly investigate the death of Zhang Yiqi and others. In the past 6 months, he had read many files about the 3 murder cases through his acquaintances in the military ministry. He had gone to the blacksmith workshop in the east of the city and the small building by the lake in the south of the city several times. As for the Jingyuan Cemetery, this was the 4th time he had come. There were some doubtful points in the files about the last 2 murder cases. The most doubtful point was that the real murderer had not been caught. However, this master of the border military did not find any connection between the 2 files. Moreover, he was secretly investigating under the order of General Xiaohe. Before he found conclusive evidence, it was inconvenient for him to communicate with the relevant departments of the imperial court. Naturally, there was no way for him to get help from those departments, such as the Chang and local government. As for the file about the death of censor Zhang Yiqi, he had read it many times. However, he did not find any problem at all. It seemed that an old censor who was afraid of his wife had a traffic accident when he ran out of the brothel in a hurry. He raised his sleeves and gently wiped the sweat that was about to drip down from his eyebrows. He struggled to stand up, held his tired waist, took a deep breath of the air mixed with the smell of smoke over the tombs, and slowly walked towards Chang'an City. The next day, the tranquility of the tomb of the censor Zhang Yiqi was disturbed again. The person who came was not the fierce wife who cried yesterday, nor the plump concubines who cried but had no tears, but Lin Ling and several runners of the Chang and local government. Today, Lin Ling did not wear the green casual clothes, but the military uniform of the Tang army, which made him look particularly neat and strong. He turned around and bowed to the runners of the Chang and local government, and said softly, "Your Honor, since I am willing to use my head as a guarantee, may I ask when we will open the coffin?" The runners separated, and the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City, Shengguan Yangyu, frowned and walked out. The person is on the journey, updated regularly, to be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote monthly. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 140. Because of the frown, Shangguan Yangyu's triangular eyes looked even uglier. He gently stroked the sparse beard on his chin and looked at Lin Ling with disgust. Although you have taken the document to return to the capital from the military ministry, and the Imperial Center administration has also proved your identity, so I will not punish you for leaving the military camp without permission, but you should know that this case has been closed for many days. What kind of argument is it to open the coffin and re-examine it because of your groundless words? Hearing this, Lin Ling knew that the conversation between them and the Chang and local government was not smooth, let alone pleasant. After a short silence, Lin Ling said softly, "Prefectural magistrate, if the Chang and local government insists on not opening the coffin and re-examining it, I have to ask the military ministry for help." "Are you using the military ministry to threaten me?" Shangguan Yangyu had never been a man of iron bones. But now that he had the opportunity to sit in the position of the head of the Chang and local government, he was not willing to lose face in front of his subordinates. He sneered and reminded, "The censor is buried in the tomb. Even if there is a change in the case, it is still a problem for the security of the capital. If I don't say anything, even the military ministry has no reason to intervene. Do you want me to go to court with your general?" Lin Ling thought of the military counselor's advice before he left and looked at the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an. He suddenly understood something and said with a smile, "Sir, I just found some doubts, so I told the Chang and local government. I think since you are willing to come to the cemetery, you must have some intentions. But I don't know what you need me to pay attention to. Please tell me directly." Shangguan Yangyu looked a little better. He stroked his beard and thought for a moment. Then he said expressionlessly, "There are doubts in any case, no matter if it's the censor or the common people. I'm in charge of the Chang and city's officials and people on behalf of His Majesty. Of course, I have to make a serious judgment. But you have to know that this has nothing to do with the military ministry or General Xiahou." Lin Ling understood the hidden meaning in the prefectural magistrate's words. After thinking for a while, he lowered his voice and asked, "I have other business to attend to, but I accidentally found something wrong with the censor's remains in the tomb." "That's right." Shangguan Yangyu glanced at him indifferently and said, "And you must remember that no matter what the result of opening the coffin is, before we find the real suspect, we can only investigate in secret. Especially, we can't let the lady in the censor's mansion know about it." A subordinate heard this and said awkwardly, "Darren, if you want to open the coffin and examine the corpse, you have to inform the censor's mansion. Otherwise, if there is a lawsuit in the future, it will be very difficult for us to be on the side of reason." Shangguan Yangyu listened to his subordinate's advice and didn't answer. He just looked at Lin Ling quietly. The meaning of this behavior was very clear. She didn't ask the victim's family and opened the coffin, so she had to take the blame. Since he couldn't use the name of the military ministry and General Xiahou, he would have to take the blame if there was any disagreement afterwards. A bitter smile appeared on Lin Ling's face. He thought that the officials in Chang'an City, whether it was the scribe he dealt with a few days ago or the prefectural magistrate who came in person today, were all so slippery. If it was another situation, Lin Ling would definitely not be willing to take the blame. Without the protection of the military ministry and General Xiahou, even if he was a psyche master in the see-through realm, it would be a little troublesome to face the anger of the censor's mansion. However, the general had ordered him to do so, and he was very sure that there was something wrong with the remains in the tomb. So after a moment of silence and consideration, he looked at Shangguan Yangyu and nodded heavily, saying, "As you wish, Darren." "Very good." Shangguan Yangyu looked calm, but he began to feel anxious deep inside. Since this psyche master from the Northeast Border Army dared to take such a big blame, it meant that he was very confident about the situation in the tomb. In this way, it seemed that there was really some conspiracy behind the death of censor Zhang Yiqi. The works official, Wuxia, was waiting beside the censor's tomb with all kinds of tools. When the spring sun was in the middle of the sky and the yang qi was the strongest, with a shout, the workers transferred from the cemetery, under the command of the works official of the Chang and local government, turned the tomb that was cleaned by the family yesterday into a messy construction site. The tomb was open from the back, and a black coffin lay quietly in the slightly damp tomb. The workers put a wooden plank on top of the tomb and tied 7 ropes to it. After shouting for a long time, they finally hoisted the heavy coffin up. As the coffin was opened, Shangguan Yangyu quickly covered his nose with a handkerchief. After a while, he found that he didn't smell any stench. He frowned and looked inside through the crowd. He saw that the coroner was half bent over and attentively examining the body. He could vaguely see some bones or funerary objects. After a while, the coroner walked out of the crowd and bowed respectfully to Shangguan Yangyu. He took off the oiled mask covering his mouth and nose, and his voice was accompanied by the strong smell of peppermint oil. The censor's corpse in the coffin had long been rotten. The cloth that tied his hair was lost and the scattered and withered hair stuck to his scalp. Xianzhua carefully removed the hair and the mud-like scalp below. Then he splashed water on the yellowish-white skull and wiped it several times with a piece of cloth. A very small wound appeared on the top of the skull. It was unknown whether it was dirty blood or congealed rotten flesh. As the cloth was wiped and the water was washed, it became clearer and clearer until the thing in the wound could be seen. The officials and runners around the coffin all held their breath. Shangguan Yangyu frowned more and more. As the coroner moved the sharp tongs in his hand, everyone's body became more and more nervous and stiff. Like a rusty knife being pulled out of a bone, a shrill and horrifying sound came from inside the coffin. The coroner's forehead was covered with sweat. One of his hands was pressed against the corpse's skull to prevent it from being torn off, while the other hand slowly exerted force. Finally, he pulled out the hard object hidden in the imperial censor's skull. It was a very long iron nail. It was unknown whether it had been soaked in blood or corpse water for too long. The iron nail was covered with rust, but the front end was still extremely sharp. Looking at the iron nail in Yuan Shizue's hand, the people around the coffin all sucked in a breath of cold air. It was as if they could see the horrifying scene of a cold iron nail being hammered into the head of an imperial censor on a certain day last year. They couldn't help but shake their heads in shock and horror. Some people even subconsciously shrank their necks. Lin Ling stood next to the coroner in silence. Because among all the people present, only he could basically know what he would see at this moment. He looked at the prefectural magistrate of Chang and who had an extremely ugly expression and said calmly, "Your Excellency, the suspicious point has been revealed. The following investigation is the matter of Chang and local government. I will no longer participate in it." Shangguan Yangyu stared at the rusty nail for a long time and suddenly raised his head to look at the person. He said coldly, "Of course, I don't need you to participate in the investigation. But I have to remind you that I will report what should be reported to the Ministry of Penalty and what should be reported to His Majesty. But if I hear some words outside before I find out the real murderer, don't blame me for involving the general." Lin Ling cupped her hands in acknowledgement and then left the cemetery. Ning Kei didn't know that the censor Zhang Yiqi's tomb had been reopened and the Chang and local government re-examined the body. The iron nail he had driven into Zhang Yiqi's skull had been found. So he didn't know that he had just embarked on the road of revenge for less than a year, and a thick haze had already covered his future. He felt that his future was extremely bright, because the second floor of the academy would be opened in 2 days, and it was also the time when he was determined to fight. On this day, in order to cheer for Xie Qingyun and the other 6 students of the course of magic skills to enter the second floor, the students of the academy went to a banquet in a noble restaurant. Among them was him, who was forcibly dragged there by Situelan. Salem's Armed Storm is open again in the Chidian game channel. There's a heroic spirit system in it after level 32. Something Fishy is one of the heroic spirit guardians. Those who are interested can go and play it. P.S. Something fishy in reality, that is, I arrived in Xiamen yesterday to deal with some private affairs and then fell ill. I was very uncomfortable, so I didn't pretend to be pitiful and sad. I just struggled to write it because I was worried that it would be too lousy. If it was really lousy, I would go back and revise it. But now I can't change it because I'm already so uncomfortable that I don't even know whether what I wrote is lousy or not. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 141. The second floor of the academy would be opened before the headmaster who traveled abroad returned. It was unknown where the news came from, but according to the instructor's replies, it could be basically confirmed that it was true, and the date was the day after tomorrow. Everyone knew that it was difficult to enter the second floor of the academy, as difficult as ascending to heaven. The students knew that they probably wouldn't encounter Haotian's blessing. The students who could enter the second floor should be Xie Qingyun and the other 5 arcane science students. Therefore, after school, some people began to make a ruckus to cheer for the 6 of them. This matter had nothing to do with Ning Quebec. As a classmate forgotten by the academy and a nobody marginalized by the students, no one could think that his whole mind was also on the second floor. After the bell was dismissed, he wanted to go to the old library to ask Professor Yu Orchin Pippi. He wanted to know if it was possible for him to enter the second floor with his current state. Unexpectedly, he was dragged out of the academy by Situ Lan before he left. In Miss Situ's words, no matter how unsociable you were, you still had to participate in such group activities. Even if you were excluded by your classmates, if you often appeared and did not wander in the woods and meadows like a lonely ghost as usual, then there would be a day when the resentment of that day would be resolved peacefully. Ning Ke did not think that he needed to strive to squeeze into the circle of the academy's classmates and exchange this attitude for some kind of gentle environment around him. However, Situ Lan was usually very kind to him, so it was a little embarrassing. After thinking for a moment, he also left the academy and entered Chang'an City with the students. The gathering place chosen by the students of the academy was in the south of the city, which was a restaurant converted from a noble mansion by the lake. There was a plaque hanging on the restaurant, on which was the name written by the libationer himself, Victory House. Victory House was the first noble restaurant in Chang'an City, covering a large area with extremely exquisite and luxurious decorations. The guests were either ministers of the imperial court or rich people from the 4 cities. If it were not for the academy's reputation, it would be extremely difficult to even book a heavenly dining platform outside the mansion. Now it was spring and the grass was long. The old pear wood outside the mansion was hung with layers of gauze, which danced in the spring breeze. The scene was extremely beautiful. More than 100 young male and female students smiled against the railing, chuckled around the lake, or lifted the gauze to walk, which suddenly turned this place into a wonderful place for youth and singing. Ning Ke stood in an inconspicuous corner, holding a small teapot in his hand, calmly watching his classmates who were playing in the spring breeze. Thinking that he probably would not see any enthusiastic faces at the banquet later, he still sat in the corner in a daze. He estimated that he would leave in advance in the middle of the banquet, so he called the manservant of the Victory House and gave him some money, asking him to hire someone to send a message to Lin 47th Street and let Sang Sang bring the carriage to wait outside the door. After a long time, the students who were in the limelight chose the most elegant and unrestrained table by the railing, and the students who were in the heat of love looked at a secluded place in the bamboo forest behind the curtain. Only then did the large balcony by the lake gradually quiet down. Situ Lan deserved to be the little leader of the female army in Chang'an. She stood up and said a few words in a natural and unrestrained manner, nothing more than wishing the 6 students of the course of magic skills to achieve good results the day after tomorrow, and wishing all the classmates to make progress in their studies and so on. As soon as she finished speaking, all kinds of fruits and exquisite food were served like flowing water. The students began to drink and have fun. In the most lively place, they could clearly hear the students' earnest expectations and light flattery to Xie Qingyun and other 5 people. I heard that the second floor only recruits 1 person this time. Linchuan Wangying still looked childish. Looking at those big brothers and sisters around her, she then turned to the side and timidly asked, was it the same rule before? Xie Qingyun smiled and looked at the classmates around him. He calmly replied, the rule of the second floor is different every time it opens. It is possible to recruit only 1 person this time. It is quite difficult, so I will try my best to live up to the expectations of my classmates and the teacher's painstaking teaching. Zhong Dajuan opened the folding fan with a snap and said with a loud laugh, Qingyun, you have now entered the no-doubt state. Even Professor Chao calls you the first person in the course of magic skills and thinks that you have a great chance to enter the second floor. If even you have no confidence, then who else can enter the second floor this year? Thinking of this, Linchuan Wangying could not help but look a little gloomy. Immediately, his youthful face showed undisguised envy to Xie Qingyun and said, Brother Xie, when you enter the second floor in the future, you must remember to tell everyone what it is like inside. I am really curious. Xie Qingyun gently smiled and patted the teenager's shoulder, saying, you are still young. Even if you can't enter the second floor this time, you will enter it next time. You don't need me to inquire about it for you. At this moment, there came a rush of hooves outside the Victory House. The students at the lakeside banquet did not care about it. Every day in Chang'an City, they could see several groups of cavalries galloping. Only Ning Ke, who sat quietly in the corner, looked up at the source of the hooves, because he could tell that these cavalries were not the Yulin Royal Guards, but the frontier army who had really seen blood on the battlefield. A moment later, a young general dressed in military attire walked up to the lakeside terrace under the lead of a few subordinates. He looked at these students drinking and having fun in the spring breeze, his brows couldn't help but furrow slightly. He directly lifted the veil curtain and charged into the even more quiet and secluded depths of the courtyard. Several Tang soldiers carried a smell of iron and blood, which was very different from the relaxed atmosphere on the lakeside terrace. When they appeared, the voices of the academy students subconsciously lowered. These officers were dressed in military uniforms and light armors. They strode forward, looking extremely valiant. They even caused a few tables to tilt, which made the students of the academy a little unhappy. The Tangs valued military achievements and most loved and admired the frontier army who bathed in blood and guarded the gate of the country. On ordinary occasions, even the ministers of the court would only smile and not care about the slightly reckless actions of these officers. However, the academy students at the lakeside gathering today were extremely young and more or less had some arrogance in their bones. Some students could not bear the anger in their heart and sneered at the backs of those officers. Even if Su Shi came here in person, he would not dare to be disrespectful to our academy. These officers really don't know how powerful I am. Su Shi was the Defender General of the Tang state and undoubtedly the first person in the imperial military. But in the eyes of these proud academy students, he did not seem particularly powerful. The Tang officers who were walking forward suddenly stopped when they heard this. The leading young general turned his head and looked at the academy students around with slightly cold eyes. After a moment of silence, the young general said faintly and mockingly, "So you are the academy students. You don't go hunting in the mountains in spring but go sightseeing in the city. You are really getting worse with each generation." The students of the academy on the terrace could not stand it anymore. They all stood up and wanted to talk to the young general. Unexpectedly, the young general did not back down and continued to say with a frosty face, "When I was studying in the academy, proud people always had to have the ability to be proud. Now you little guys have only learned a little and you are already talking big." Hearing this, the students realized that this young general was actually the senior brother of the academy. They could not help but feel a little awkward and did not know what to say. The young general refused to let them go and reprimanded them coldly. Even if General Su Shi came here in person, he would not dare to be disrespectful to our academy. These words are indeed not wrong, but all of you must remember one thing. What great General Su respects is the dean, he respects the instructors, and not you bunch of trash. From now on, keep your mouths shut when you are outside. If I hear any academy students talk big outside, don't blame me for beating you up according to the academy rules. The first lesson of the academy was about etiquette. Etiquette was the rule. The rule of the academy was that whoever had the bigger fist and seniority was the one in the right. This was the teaching that the students had long remembered. At this time, when they heard that the senior of the academy was going to use the academy rules, naturally, no one dared to speak carelessly. Situilan lifted the veil and looked at the situation here. She could not help but laugh out loud. She looked at the young general and said, "Second brother Hua, you are the senior captain of the Gushan Commandery. Why do you have to be angry at your junior brothers and sisters?" Hearing this, the students looked at the young general with even more different eyes. The senior captain of the Gushan Commandery, Hua Shanhua, was a star figure in the young generation of the Tang military. No wonder he was so powerful before. Hua Shanhua looked at Situilan who came out from behind the veil and sighed helplessly. He shook his head and said, "I forgot that you are now also studying in the academy. I have something urgent to do today. I will go to pay my respects to the general tomorrow night." Situilan glanced at the most secluded backyard of the Victory House and guessed who he was going to see after hurrying back from the Gushan Commandery. She smiled and said, "I'll go in to pay my respects later. It's no problem for you to go." Hua Shanhua glanced at the academy students around and suddenly saw a somewhat familiar face in the corner. He was slightly startled but did not say anything. He continued with a smile, "It's okay to bring Wuxia, but other irrelevant people should not be brought in. Here are all the outstanding talents of the academy." Situilan said with a smile and reminded him without a trace. Hua Shanhua smiled gratefully and understood what she wanted to say. He raised his fists to salute and hurried away. When they were drunk, the lively place became livelier and the desolate place became more desolate. Situilan used some method to avoid the eyes of her classmates and quietly went to the most inconspicuous corner behind the veil. She looked at Ning Ke who was half of his body looking for frogs and frowned. She said, "Why don't you want to talk more with them? Their faces are disgusting and their words are boring." Ning Ke looked at the water reptiles on the moss of the lake and sighed regretfully. He turned his head to look at her and said, "This is probably how they see me. If that's the case, why should I go over and affect their appetite?" Situilan looked at him seriously and said, "These months you have been wandering like a lonely ghost. I really don't understand. Don't you want to clear your name and tell the whole academy that you didn't avoid the battle in the semester exam? The semester exam bet is really a very boring thing. Of course, I am not used to being wronged. But since I have been wronged, it will be too weak to go to the fun and harmonious. It will be disgusting." Ning Ke said with a smile, "I will clear my name." Situilan asked, "When?" Ning Ke thought for a while and then answered with some uncertainty, "Maybe, the day after tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 142. When the second floor opened and everyone was silent, you suddenly stood up and said with a smile, "I can." Situilan looked at him and shook her head with a smile. She sighed and said, "The picture is beautiful and the story is wonderful. But it's a pity that you and I are both poor people who can't cultivate." "I can." Ning Ke thought that the girl by the railing would not believe him even if he said it. He smiled gently and changed the topic. He looked at the lively place on the other side of the veil and said slowly, if the second floor only recruits one person this time, then I don't understand why they are so happy. Situelan said with a smile, because Mr. Xie is much more popular than you. Even if someone is jealous of him, they won't show it on their faces. Instead, they will cheer for him like Zhong Dajuan. Ning Ke was silent for a moment and suddenly said with a smile, have you all forgotten someone? Situelan was stunned and then immediately understood what he meant. She was shocked speechless. All the students of the academy, including her, had forgotten Prince Longqing from the Yan Kingdom. Maybe it was because in their minds, Prince Longqing was a bigwig in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace and a peerless cultivation genius. So they subconsciously put him in a higher position and never thought of comparing him with themselves. Moreover, the god's favorite son, who had aroused the desire of thousands of girls when he entered Chang'an City, had been living in Peach Alley these days. He even found an excuse not to attend the palace banquets. He was really low-key to the extreme. Everyone knows that Prince Longqing came to Chang'an City to replace the Crown Prince of Yen as a hostage. But no matter his identity as a prince or the inviolable dignity of the West Hill Divine Palace, he needs another justifiable reason. So the rumor that he wants to enter the second floor of the academy for further study, may not be just a rumor. Ning Ke looked at her and continued, if the second floor of the academy really only recruits one student this time, and if Prince Longqing really wants to enter the second floor, then in your opinion, who is qualified to be his opponent, Xie Qingyun or Linchuan Wangying? Mr. Xie is indeed talented, but how can he be compared with Prince Longqing? And Wang Ying is still young. Situelan gradually digested the shock in her heart and suddenly thought of a possibility. She asked, is it possible that Prince Longqing doesn't occupy the quota of entering the building? Ning Ke shook his head and said, if he occupies the quota, what will these happy guys do? He smiled and pretended to comfort her. But I think Xie Qingyun will not be discouraged even if he knows that he has to compete with Prince Longqing for the only place. On the contrary, he may be inspired to fight more strongly. Situelan shook her head and said, Prince Longqing is one step away from the knowing destiny state, while Mr. Xie has just entered the no-doubt state. The difference between their states is too great, and the fighting won't play a big role. Looking at those classmates who were drinking happily on the terrace, and thinking of the scene when the second floor opened the day after tomorrow, when Prince Longqing would come and embarrass the academy students, she said gloomily, although Mr. Xie comes from the South Jin Kingdom and is not a citizen of Tang, he has studied in the academy for a year after all. We Tangs can accept it if he can enter the second floor. But if Prince Longqing surpasses all the students and becomes the only one to enter the second floor, it's hard to imagine how angry and disappointed the elders in the imperial court will be with our students. Prince Longqing came from the Yen Kingdom and was a hostage. However, he was a bigwig of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace and an enemy of the Tang Empire. If such a person directly suppressed the young generation of the Tang Empire in Chang'an City with his powerful strength, it would be like a slap in the face of the Tang Empire. I don't understand why the academy made such a rule this time. Situelan frowned and looked at the anxious fish swimming in the lake. She said, isn't it deliberately creating a scene for Prince Longqing to look down on all the mountains? Ning Ke smiled and comforted her, it hasn't started yet, and we don't know how to enter the second floor of the academy. How can you predict in advance that the only person who can enter the second floor is Prince Longqing? The West Hill Divine Palace is the enemy of the Tang Empire. Even from the standpoint of the enemy, I have to admit that Prince Longqing is absolutely the best person in the young generation in the world and it's hard to find an opponent. Situelan said in a low mood, it's not shameful to admit the strength of the enemy. What really bothers me is that the Tang Empire has always been full of talents, but we can't find a person who can compete with him in our generation. Who said there isn't? Ning Ke said with a smile. Situelan looked at him with a smile and said, if you want to talk about yourself, it's really not convincing. All right. Ning Ke sighed and spread out his arms. He said, you don't have to worry about these things. It's just a matter of face. Even if Prince Long Qing's strong body can shock all the heroes and women, the Yen Kingdom will still pay tribute to us, and the West Hill Divine Palace will still not dare to provoke us. There won't be any essential change. It's not about face, it's about honor and dignity. You also came from the frontier army, but why don't you feel like a soldier at all? What should a soldier of the Tang Empire be like? Just like Hua Shanhua just now, with his eyes straight and his hand on the hilt of his sword, walking with the wind like a bully? I don't think so. A soldier doesn't defend the land and open up the frontier by style, but by something else. Something else? Discipline, courage, and trust. By the way, you should know Hua Shanhua, don't you? Situilan looked at him curiously. Ning Ke thought of the moment when he and the senior commander of the Gushan Commandery looked at each other. After a moment of silence, he replied with a smile, he is the leader of the young generation of the Tang Empire's military. I'm just an ordinary person, so I don't know him. I just met him once, but that was a year ago. Speaking of which, I remember that he didn't like me at that time. Situilan didn't know what happened on the grassland trip. She said with a smile, I found that not many people in Chang'an like you. Ning Ke shook his head and refuted, you obviously don't know me well enough. You can ask the neighbors on Lin 47th Street. Except for the wife of Wu Lao next door, who doesn't like me. I also took you to the House of Red Sleeves last time. Look at those girls, who doesn't like me? I don't want to bicker with you. Situilan looked at the quiet and secluded house in the depths of the Victory House and said, will you go in with us or alone? What for? Ning Ke followed her gaze and shook his head, saying, I don't want to eat with Her Highness, and she may not invite us in. You really guessed that Her Highness is having a banquet over there? Situilan replied with a smile, Her Highness may not ask us to go in normally. But since all the classmates of the academy are gathered here today, and the guests invited by Her Highness are certainly not ordinary people, then she will definitely ask us to go in later. Ning Ke thought for a moment and understood the hidden meaning in her words just like Hua Shanhua did before. He couldn't help but laugh sarcastically and thought silently in his heart, Li Yu, you still can't help developing your power among the young generation of the empire and enhance your influence. At the same time, you can take this opportunity to show your power to the distinguished guests. It's impossible for more than 100 people to go in. He said with a smile, later, they will definitely choose some guys with good grades and good moral character to go in to meet Her Highness. How can I have a chance? Situilan remembered that she met his little handmaiden Sang Sang in the princess mansion one day and said angrily, you and Her Highness used to be old friends, and now you are also familiar with each other. If I take you in, who dares to say anything? Being able to buy the former censor's mansion in Southern City to open a restaurant, the boss of the Victory House naturally had a deep background. But managing the business of people coming and going, he must be a person with money and power. Although the students of the academy could not earn much money by booking the lakeside terrace, he would definitely find a way to get close to those students in preparation for the future. However, today he did not go to deal with those students at all. Instead, he respectfully waited outside the second door like a manservant. Dozens of handmaidens and servants carried food plates and utensils and walked between the quiet houses. They were well trained and did not make the slightest sound. In the house, only the rustling sound of the wind blowing the treetops could be heard. The boss of the Victory House stared at everyone's movements with his sharp eyes. After confirming that there was no problem, he slightly relaxed and raised his arm to wipe the sweat on his forehead. Being able to book the most quiet and the most expensive backyard of the Victory House, and being able to make the boss of the Victory House willing to serve as a manservant, it could be imagined how distinguished the identity of the guests and hosts of today's backyard banquet was. The host of today's banquet was Her Royal Highness the fourth Princess of the Tang Dynasty, Li Yu. The guest she invited was indeed a distinguished guest. And if there was no accident, after this guest left Chang'an City, he would never have a chance to return to Chang'an in the rest of his life. At the end of the shiny ebony floor, two low tables were placed opposite each other. On the left side, behind the low table sat a young man. He was dressed in plain green clothes with a jade hairpin in his bun. He had straight eyebrows and bright eyes, looking extremely calm and gentle. Only a few strands of silver hair could be faintly seen in his hair, inadvertently revealing the depression of these years. The Crown Prince of the Yan, who had been a hostage in Chang'an City for nearly 10 years, calmly looked at the Tang Dynasty's Princess Li Yu opposite him. He picked up the wine glass at hand and slowly and firmly drank it up. Then he sighed and said, "In the 4th year of the Tianqi era, I went to Chang'an to travel. In the 6th year, I came back to Chang'an City as a hostage. Counting with my fingers, I have known your highness for 10 years. Although you went to the grassland for 2 years in between, we grew up together. I don't know when we can meet again. I can't help but sigh. Brother Chongming, you and I both know that if you still want to meet in Chang'an City, there must be only 2 reasons. In this case, it's better not to meet, or if there is a chance, I will go to capital Cheng to visit you." Li Yu smiled slightly, picked up the small wine glass that she had been playing with for a long time, and took a light sip. During the dinner, both of them knew that Crown Prince Chongming would inherit the throne after the death of the Yan Emperor. If the king of a country still wanted to enter Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire, then there were only 2 possibilities. After a self-mocking smile, he said, "The problem now is not that someone wants to take away my throne, but that this throne does not belong to me. In the eyes of all the people of Yen, my wise and mighty brother is more suitable to sit on the throne than this cowardly crown prince who has been imprisoned in Chang'an for many years." After a moment of thought, he continued softly, "Although I have left capital Cheng for many years, I still remember some things clearly when I was a child. Longqing seemed to be a genius since he was born. Whether it was riding, shooting, poetry or even cultivation, it seemed that there was nothing in the world that he could not do. Compared with him, I, the crown prince, have nothing special. So my father likes him and dotes on him. It has become a very natural thing for the ministers to trust and rely on him. What's more, he is now a bigwig in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace." The Crown Prince of the Yen looked at Li Yu and said, "From the day he entered the Revelation Institute of West Hill, Longqing's mother's family began to build momentum in capital Cheng. Now this momentum can no longer be suppressed by human power, because he has strong support from outside, and the strong support comes from West Hill. I am still confused, but I will work hard." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. If it was purely a bad thing for Longqing and West Hill, they would not have agreed to father's request a few months ago. Li Yu was deep in thought. Suddenly, she frowned and muttered to herself, "If he can't enter the 2nd floor, I heard that there is a great scholar from the South Jin Kingdom in the academy." The Crown Prince of the Yen murmured. The two looked at each other for a moment and shook their heads at the same time. The opening of the 2nd floor of the academy this time clearly stated that only one person would be accepted. In fact, it was because of the handover behind the scenes. That position was originally prepared for Prince Longqing. And with that person's ability, even if they could arrange some competitors, it would not be enough to shake him. At this moment, there was a rush of footsteps on the wooden corridor outside the quiet and deep house. The Crown Prince of the Yen looked at Li Yu with an inquiring look. Li Yu replied with a smile, "Hua Shangyue and several of his comrades." As soon as she finished speaking, Hua Shangyue, the senior military officer of Gushan Commandery in a dusty military uniform, and several officers beside him walked into the long hall. They first saluted Li Yu with a fist and palm salute, and then greeted the crown prince of the Yan. Maids and servants set up the wine table again. Hua Shangyue and several others sat down as ordered, and the house returned to tranquility. Li Yu calmly looked at the crown prince of the Yan and said, "I ordered senior military officer Hua to hurry back to Chang, and because I want to meet him before you leave, brother Chongming. I have been stationed in Hebei province all year round, and may be transferred from Gushan Commandery to Shanin Commandery after the new year." Hua Shangyue added. Shanin Commandery was located in the southeast of Min Mountain, adjacent to the Yan territory. The Tang Empire stationed in this commandery was not as terrible as the border army led by General Xiahou in the north, but it was the closest armed force in the Tang Empire to the capital of the Yan Kingdom, capital Cheng. In the early years, the crown prince of the Yan had seen Hua Shangyue and knew that he was a fanatical admirer of the fourth princess Li Yu, and was also the focus of the young generation of the Tang Empire's military. He could naturally think that Li Yu hurriedly called him back to the capital not to see him off, but to hide a deeper meaning. Hearing that Hua Shangyue personally admitted that he would be transferred to Shanin Commandery next year, the crown prince of the Yan instantly understood Li Yu's meaning. He looked at the wine bottle on the table and fell into a long time of thinking. Although there was no change of expression on his face, the struggle and conflict in his heart had reached the extreme. After a long time, he said in a slightly hoarse voice, "If things don't develop to the last step, I will never use your chess piece." Li Yu calmly replied, "If we don't have to go to the last step, it will naturally be a happy ending. But if it really comes to the last step, I hope brother Chongming will have the courage to make the move without regret. I want you to understand that this is not only for the interests of the Tang Empire, but I also hope that you can get what belongs to you." The so-called farewell was just the final endorsement of some transactions and promises. Although there must be a 10-year friendship in it, it was, after all, related to the country. Once the superficial warmth was torn off, it was difficult for the banquet to return to the original cheerful appearance. The scene seemed a little awkward for a while. Hua Shangyue remembered what he had seen outside the house and said with a smile, "The lakeside terrace of Victory House has been booked today. It's noisy there, but it's much livelier than here." "Oh." Li Yu slightly raised her eyebrows and curiously asked, "Who is so generous?" When she said this, she didn't realize that it was really a big deal that she booked the most quiet and expensive backyard of the Victory House. After all, she was the most respected princess in the Tang Empire. Who could compare with her? They are the students of the academy this year. Situilan and Wuxia are among them. When I met her before, she said that she would come to toast and greet us later. I thought that your highness specially came to see off Crown Prince Chongming today. I don't know if it's convenient, so I didn't agree. The students of the academy are the pillars of the Tang Empire or the whole world. What's the harm in meeting them? Princess Li Yu, who was known for being virtuous and cherishing talents, would naturally not miss such an opportunity to win the hearts of young talents. She looked at the crown prince with a smile and said, "I believe brother Chongming also wants to meet the new students of the academy." "Of course." The crown prince nodded calmly. The students of the academy who were drinking and having fun on the lakeside terrace did not completely forget the previous reprimand of Hua Shangyue. However, he was the county commander of the military and a senior of the academy. In addition, his words were sharp and merciless, but every word was true. There was no way to refute him. So they could only bear it silently and comfort themselves in the name of senior brothers. When they were summoned by the nobles in the backyard of the Victory House, they realized that their so-called pride was indeed not suitable to break out in Chang and city. In this magical city, they might meet a little marquis who was also drunk when they peed in a side alley. They might meet a prince from the Yueluan kingdom when they were bragging in a tea shop. They just wanted to take the chance to get together, but they actually met the princess of the Tang Empire who was bidding farewell to the crown prince of the Yan kingdom. The Victory House occupied a very large area. The backyard was the ancestral property left by an old censor in the Shinfeng years. It was easy to accommodate 200 or 300 people. But after all, it was summoned by the princess. How could all the students of the academy line up to greet her and turn the quiet courtyard into a vegetable market? They just chose some students with good grades and good reputation as representatives. Among the representatives, there were naturally 6 people in the course of magic skills led by Xie Qingyun, famous talents such as Zhong Dajuan, Chang, and influential children such as Situe Lan and Chu Zhongtian, as well as someone. When the students of the academy entered the quiet house, Li Yu was talking to the crown prince of the Yan in a low voice. Suddenly, she frowned slightly and looked over subconsciously. Sure enough, she saw the familiar and hateful face at the end of the crowd. In the past 6 months, she often called Sang Sang to the princess mansion to talk with her, but she had never seen Ning Ke again. But through various ways, Ning Ke's behavior in the academy still entered her ears. She knew about the semester exam bet and that he was later excluded by the academy's classmates. But she had never said anything. They just met on the journey. How could the experience of an academy student be qualified to attract her attention? Even if she wanted to, she could not show it at many times. Greetings, Your Highness. Greetings, Crown Prince Chongming. Xie Qingyun, Zhong Dajuan, Linchuan Wangying and other students stood in front of the quiet corridor of the courtyard and saluted the 2 nobles at the table in turn. After several exchanges, the students performed well, especially Xie Qingyun and Wang Ying's words were quite clear and solemn. Li Yu felt more satisfied, but it was a pity that the 3rd young master Xie was from the South Jin Kingdom instead of the Tang Empire. Brother Chongming, what do you think of the young talents of the Tang Empire? Li Yu looked at the crown prince of the Yan and asked with a smile. The crown prince of the Yan replied with a slight smile, the Tang Empire dominates the world, and the academy is a sacred place for thousands of years. Naturally, it is extraordinary. At this moment, there was a sudden noise outside the quiet backyard of the Victory House. There were voices of obstruction and reprimand, and it seemed that someone was rushing here. Li Yu looked at the passage covered by the bamboo outside the corridor and held a small wine cup between her fingers. She did not say anything, but slightly frowned. Hua Shanyue, who was sitting 2 feet behind her, looked solemn and sternly scolded, who is so bold to break into the banquet place of Her Highness. The noise outside the courtyard quickly turned into a still messy sound that represented a completely different meaning. The music from the bamboo forest behind the corridor suddenly became disorderly and out of tune, faintly mixed with the surprised cries of a young girl and the sound of a messenger knocking over a banquet table in shock. Then, all these sounds disappeared in the next moment. In the quiet courtyard, under the roofed porch, next to the bamboo wall, there was no sound. It became quiet, so quiet that it made one's heart palpitate, except for the footsteps that seemed to fall on one's heart on the stone path. The slow footsteps coming from outside the courtyard did not belong to one person and were not orderly. But the ears of the people in the courtyard seemed to hear only the footsteps of one person. The footsteps were very stable and could release a very strong sense of pride just by hearing, as if every step he took was stepping on the heaven's way leading to the firmament. The owner of the Victory House walked in front with a pained and helpless expression like a pitiful servant boy. Although bringing outsiders to the 4th princess banquet place was undoubtedly the fastest way to death, the guests behind him at this time also had a great background. More importantly, the reason given by the other party could not be refuted at all. Walking on the stone path was Grand Secretary Zheng Jing of the Imperial Library of the Tang Empire. This official was deeply trusted by His Majesty and the Empress. There was a faint smile on his face and his real emotions could not be seen. On the right side of Grand Secretary Zheng Jing was a middle-aged man in a black Taoist robe with a Haotian divine sword on his waist. He was the deputy dean of the Revelation Institute of the West Hill Divine Palace and priest Moli, who was visiting the capital Chang'an. Everyone in the Tang Empire knew that although the relationship between the Empress and fourth princess was not as incompatible as fire and water, they were naturally in the opposing camp because of the succession of the throne in a certain year. Now the chief minister under the Empress was going to break into Her Highness' banquet with a bigwig from the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Who would be willing to be caught in such a terrible turbulence? Moreover, among the crowd that came to break into the banquet, there was, Grand Secretary Xingjing and priest Moli came hand in hand. Logically speaking, they were destined to attract the attention of everyone in the courtyard. However, at this time, everyone's eyes fell on the young man behind them. There was a kind of person in the world that was born with a certain kind of charm. Even if he was a stubborn young man covered in mud among thousands of people, even if he was an ordinary-looking young girl among the dark masses of pious believers, no matter how low-key and silent he walked in the crowd, no matter how many bigwigs surrounded him, as long as he was in the picture, when people looked at him, they would definitely see him first and then be unable to move their eyes away. The young man in the crowd was such a person. He was about 20 years old and wore the lifeless Taoist robe of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. There was an ordinary-looking sword on his waist. His footsteps were calm and steady. Silently following Grand Secretary Xingjing and priest Moli into the courtyard, he instantly attracted everyone's attention. Prince Longqing's handsome eyebrows and eyes were impeccable, reflecting the faint light from the treetops and shaking off the lingering willow catkins. Just like that, Prince Longqing appeared in people's vision, like the Son of God. There was no negative emotion on his face. He was calm, but just like the clear and rigid rhythm of his footsteps, everyone present could feel his pride. The pride that was hidden deep in his body, to the point that he disdained to show it. After a short silence, people in the empty and quiet courtyard subconsciously stood up to greet him. The academy students instantly guessed the identity of this person. Their faces showed a faint confusion and a slight uneasiness in their eyes, and their emotions seemed extremely complicated. Sitting at the top of the table, Li Yu slightly lowered her eyes, and a surprised, cold and vigilant look flashed in her eyes. Sitting opposite her, the Crown Prince of Yan's eyes were more complicated, a little sad, and then he slowly stood up with a gentle smile on his face and said, "Longqing, it's really been many years." At this time, Ning Ke, who had been sitting in the most remote corner of the courtyard and kept complaining that the etiquette of kneeling was really not in line with human mechanics, finally noticed these uninvited guests. He opened his mouth and looked at the outstanding Prince Longqing in the crowd, and exclaimed, "It's really a click of thunder. The male pig horn finally shines on the stage. Tomorrow is Saturday. I'm off. Besides, I know it's slow to write now. There's no other way. I've tried my best. Don't force me to die. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 144. Priest Moli, the deputy head of the Revelation Institute, explained that Prince Longqing had caught a cold on his way from West Hill to Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire. He had been recuperating in Peach Alley, so he had not been able to visit his brother. Today, he learned that the Crown Prince would return home tomorrow, so he rushed here to see him despite his illness. How could a bigwig of the Judicial Department of West Hill Divine Palace, a powerhouse on the edge of knowing destiny state, be bedridden by a cold on the journey? Naturally, no one believed this excuse. Everyone present knew that Prince Longqing just didn't want to meet the Crown Prince too early. However, on such an occasion, since the West Hill had given an excuse, everyone could only accept it. How could they rebuke him? From the moment Prince Longqing entered the courtyard, everyone's eyes were attracted to him, especially the female students of the academy. They whispered and praised him, and some of the girls gradually became infatuated with him. Hearing Priest Moli's excuse, they could not help but wonder how he would answer and whether he would show an embarrassed expression. Prince Longqing did not answer. When Priest Moli explained, he just sat quietly on the table next to the Crown Prince of the Yen. There was no embarrassment on his face. To be more precise, apart from some polite smiles, there was basically no emotion on his picturesque face. It was as if he was telling everyone present that he knew this was an excuse, and it was a boring one, but what did it have to do with him? His whole body exuded a sense of righteousness and seriousness. Even his picturesque face could not dilute it. It was not until then that people gradually remembered that Prince Longqing had an even greater identity besides being a cultivation genius and a fan of thousands of people. He was in charge of the judicial department of the Divine Hall and had great power and prestige. After the two parties sat down, someone introduced each other. Knowing that Prince Longqing was accompanied by Grand Secretary Xingjing, the students of the academy couldn't help but stand up to salute him. The Grand Secretary Xingjing was the official of council who lived opposite the Xianwei general's mansion. Because of the disturbance in his house, the empress was furious, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. He offended the big families in Qinghe County and was appreciated by His Majesty and the empress. From then on, he became one of the few important officials in the court. Although the students of the academy were proud, if they could not enter the second floor, they would still become officials in the imperial court after graduation. How could they dare to offend such a bigwig? As for Ning Ke, who was sitting in the corner, his thoughts were different from those of his classmates. He curiously looked at the high-ranking official in the distance and thought to himself, "You didn't have such authority when I was young. I am Wang Ying from Linchuan. Greetings, Grand Secretary. I am Zhong Dajuan of Yangguan. Greetings, Grand Secretary. Xie Qingyun from the South Jin Kingdom greets the Grand Secretary." Xie Qingyun stood up and greeted the Grand Secretary with a smile. Some people noticed that he did not say that he was a junior. After thinking for a while, they understood that he was not being rude to the Grand Secretary, but he did not want to be at a disadvantage in front of some people. Mr. Xie's talent has spread far and wide. I have lived in Chang'an for a long time and have heard of your achievements in the South Jin Kingdom's imperial examination. It is really gratifying to hear that you are diligent in the course of magic skills in the academy. Grand Secretary Xingjing smiled and stroked his beard. He looked at Prince Longqing who was sitting opposite him and said, "Your Highness is known as a genius of the present age. Now that you are entering the academy for further study, you should get closer to Mr. Xie." Upon hearing this, Prince Longqing nodded slightly as if he agreed with Grand Secretary Xingjing's words. But because his movements were so subtle, it was hard to see his sincerity. There was no expression on his beautiful face and he did not deliberately reveal a cold and arrogant look. But this expressionlessness revealed a very accurate message, that was, he did not care. An eagle would not show its pride in front of an ant, and a mountain would not deliberately look down on a small hill. Because in their view, they did not exist in the same world and there was no need to show extra emotions at all. But for the receiver, this kind of indifference was the heaviest pride and arrogance, and this kind of disregard was undoubtedly the most ruthless contempt and humiliation. Xie Qingyun, the third young master of the Xie family, who had always been known for his talent and demeanor in the academy, stood alone in the field for a long time before returning to his seat with a slight smile. Only by paying attention could one notice that his smile was somewhat unnatural. It was just a small episode. The real problem of today's Victory House banquet had been hidden behind the scenes. When Prince Longqing and the Crown Prince of Yen met, whether they fought or not, it was always an internal struggle for the throne of Yen Kingdom. Princess Li Yu was obviously on the side of the Crown Prince of Yen, and Grand Secretary Xingjing came with Prince Longqing. Although it seemed that he was accompanying His Majesty, who could be sure that he did not represent the Empress's inclination? The throne of Yen Kingdom was related to the relationship between the two countries, and at the same time, it would further strengthen or weaken the power contrast between the two royal families of the Tang Empire. But in front of the people of Yan, the West Hill divine priest, and a group of students, both Princess Li Yu and Grand Secretary Xing Jing had to maintain the dignity and bearing that an empire should have. His Majesty ordered me to accompany Prince Long Qing to familiarize himself with the surroundings of Chang'an. Although we did not have a deep conversation, I deeply felt that the prince's knowledge was extraordinary and admirable. Coupled with his amazing cultivation, it would not be difficult for him to enter the second floor of the academy. Grand Secretary Xing Jing gently stroked his beard and looked at Prince Long Qing opposite him, shaking his head in admiration. No one knew what this trusted official of the Empress had in mind. He actually praised a foreign guest in front of a group of academy students. Even if it was to suppress the cooperation between the princess and the crown prince of Yan, it was really too unsightly. The representatives of the academy students at the banquet were usually the best group of people in the academy, and they were born with pride. They might not know about the throne of Yan Kingdom, but when they saw the scene of Prince Long Qing ignoring Xie Qingyun, they had a great disgust for him. At this time, when they heard Grand Secretary Xing Jing mention the matter of the second floor of the academy, they suddenly remembered that Prince Long Qing was their strongest competitor, and could not help but be shocked. Zhong Dajuan raised his eyebrows and said, "The second floor of the academy is not so easy to enter." The Tang Empire was open-minded, and it was not uncommon for people to casually interrupt in such a banquet, especially when the dispute arose. Grand Secretary Xing Jing smiled slightly and did not say anything more, as if he was not surprised by such a response. Priest Moli, who had been silent and sitting at the banquet table, coldly glanced at the banquet and indifferently said, "There are many talents in our West Hill Divine Kingdom. Prince Long Qing is the most outstanding person in our Revelation Institute in the past 10 years. He is about to enter the Knowing Destiny state in 20 years, and can be regarded as the strongest person in the young generation in the world. If he can't enter the second floor of the academy, who can?" As the deputy headmaster of West Hill Revelation Institute, he had a distinguished status. However, no one had expected that his words would be so direct and even a little arrogant. However, there was a saying that crude words were not crude. He casually put out a few nouns, and with the real examples of these years, his crude words seemed even more powerful. If the strongest person in the young generation in the world could not enter the second floor of the academy, then who could? Entering the Knowing Destiny state and entering the Knowing Destiny state are two different things. Hua Shangyue, the senior military officer of Gushan Commandery, said with a slightly gloomy face, "There are many people in the world who are known as cultivation geniuses, but they have been stuck at the threshold of the Knowing Destiny state all their lives. Although I am not as talented as Prince Long Qing is now only at the peak of the see-through state. To say that he is the strongest person in the young generation. I don't know if this is an overpraise, but I am afraid that the priest's words are overpraising." Priests of the West Hill Divine Palace traveled around the world and were treated with great respect. However, when they entered the territory of the Tang Empire and entered Chang'an, the officials seemed to be warm and courteous, but in fact, most people were like Hua Shangyue at this time, looking down on these Taoist priests who pretended to be mysterious. Once they were angry, they did not care about rhetoric, refuting, questioning, and mocking words, and swung at them as hard as a stick. Priest Moli forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart and stared at Hua Shanyue's eyes, saying coldly, "There are indeed young powerhouses in the Great River, South Jin, and Yueluan. But in recent years, I really don't know what kind of bigwig has appeared in the Tang Empire." Hua Shanyue did not show weakness and stared back at him, saying, "Wang Jinglu of the Tang Empire is now serving under the Defender General of the state. Because of the rules of the Imperial Center Administration, he is now only a bodyguard, so he is really not a bigwig. But no one can take away his title of being invincible below the Knowing Destiny state." These words were really powerful. Wang Jinglu of the Tang Empire did not come from the West Hill, and had nothing to do with the Buddhism sect. He became a talent purely through self-cultivation and was known as invincible below the knowing destiny state. Although Prince Long Qing came from the West Hill Divine Palace and was known as a peerless cultivation genius, as long as he had not entered the knowing destiny state and had not defeated Wang Jinglu, he could not be called truly invincible. The quiet house fell into a short period of silence, and then the silence was quickly broken by an extremely calm voice. The voice belonged to Prince Long Qing, who had been silent throughout the banquet. Prince Long Qing raised the wine glass in his hand and looked at Hua Shanyu quietly. But his clear eyes seemed to be looking at somewhere far away, falling on the military camp beside the vast great swamp. He said indifferently, invincible below the knowing destiny state. I have wanted to change this title for him a long time ago, but unfortunately I have not found the opportunity. General Hua, if it is convenient, please pass a message to Wang Jinglu for me. I hope he can go to Chang'an as soon as possible. You know, it is not convenient for me to leave Chang'an city now. Prince Long Qing retracted his gaze and looked into Hua Shanyue's eyes without a trace of emotion. He said, if he appears late, I will not have the opportunity to change his title. Facing the pair of calm and emotionless eyes, Hua Shanyue's heart trembled slightly. He could not help but choke and swallow the words he had prepared. Because what he saw in Prince Long Qing's eyes was not the desire to fight after being provoked, but the calmness and confidence from before. Many people present understood this sentence: if Wang Jinglu appeared late, he would not have the opportunity to change Wang Jinglu's title. It did not mean that he could not fight with Wang Jinglu, nor did it mean that he thought he might fail, but because he firmly believed that he would step into the knowing destiny state in the near future. At that time, if he defeated Wang Jinglu, wouldn't Wang Jinglu still retain the title of invincible below the knowing destiny state? He was sure that he would step into the knowing destiny state in the near future, and even felt that it was a pity that he did not have the opportunity to fight with Wang Jinglu and defeat him. What kind of experience did he have to go through to be so confident and indifferent? Being shocked by the Prince of Yan Kingdom, an enemy from the judicial department of West Hill, Li Yu's delicate eyebrows slowly frowned. Thinking of the old men in the Imperial Center administration and the young powerhouses that emerged in the surrounding countries in the past few years, she could not help but feel a faint sense of powerlessness. For hundreds of years, the Tang Empire was strong and its military power was unparalleled. However, as long as the people in the back of the mountain of the academy did not take action, it was extremely difficult to find a person who could compete with the foreign enemy at the individual level. It was a great pity. Her eyes swept across the students of the academy present and thought with a trace of anger, if you were really the cultivation genius that Mr. Liu Qingchen had placed his hopes on, I would not have been forced into such a situation by this prince on such an occasion. While her thoughts were still wandering, she could not find Ning Kai in the corner, which made her even more annoyed. In the side alley of the Victory House, Ning Kai stood beside the Wuxiang horse carriage and waved his hand impatiently to Sang Sang, who stuck her head out in confusion. He said, "Didn't you always make a fuss at home that you wanted to see Prince Long Qing up close?" Sang Sang explained very seriously, "Young master, I only said it once that night. I didn't make a fuss all day long." Ning Kai spread out his hands and said, "Well, do you want to see?" After getting a positive answer, he took Sang Sang to the Victory House. He took out a piece of silver with some distress and handed it to the servant of the Victory House. Then he walked through the no longer noisy terrace and approached the quiet house. He thought that Sang Sang wanted to see, so he took her to see. Anyway, Li Yu was familiar with her, so there should be no problem. Since childhood, they had lived together and had long developed a certain habit. When they saw something that the other liked, they would subconsciously save it for the other, such as fried egg noodles, hot and sour noodle slice soup, lu shui, silver, and the prince. In the quiet courtyard, everyone's attention was attracted by the previous debate, and then shocked by the strong confidence revealed in Prince Long Qing's calm words. No one actually noticed that he had quietly brought Sang Sang into the field. Among the light and elegant music, there were occasional whispers. The chief seat, Priest Moli, the deputy head of the Revelation Institute, looked proud, while Grand Secretary Xing Jing was expressionless. The atmosphere seemed a little depressing. Xie Qingyun looked at the wine cup on the table and suddenly shook his head slightly with a smile. After taking a deep breath, he stood up and saluted with hands folded in front. Looking at Prince Longqing, he said loudly, "May I ask?" Hearing these 3 words, the courtyard suddenly became quieter, and the background music quietly disappeared. Li Yu looked at the elegant Xie Qingyun standing in the field with some appreciation in her eyes. But thinking that this person was not a Tang, she inevitably felt a little regretful. Prince Longqing bent his knees and half knelt on the floor. After carefully tidying up his clothes, he looked at Xie Qingyun with a serious expression for the first time today and said seriously, "Brother Xie, please." In the corner of the courtyard, Sang Sang knelt behind Ning Ke and cautiously poked her head out. She whispered after a few glances, "Young master, it's too far, even farther than that day on the street. I can't see his face clearly." "Don't interrupt." Ning Ke picked up a piece of vinegar fish skin with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. He said, "Didn't you see the main show? It's rare to see 2 great scholars debating." Sang Sang didn't know what debating was. She curiously looked over there and asked, "Young master, who do you think will win?" Ning Ke took a sip of wine and shook his head. He said, "I only hope Xie Qingyun won't die too miserably. Sang Sang doesn't know what debating is, and I don't know what debating is either. So it's destined not to be written directly. If you want to see it, please read The Wonderful Cold Scholar of Upper Grade. You can choose one of the scenes in it and pretend that I wrote it. Like a piece of tofu, you should walk away with shame. Like a piece of tofu, you should write the first grade as the upper grade. You should continue to walk away with shame. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 145. The topic of the debate was set by Grand Secretary Xing Jing. As soon as the debate began, Xie Qingyun, who was invincible in the academy in debating, knew that he had encountered an unshakable mountain. Prince Longqing tidied up his appearance and began to debate with a dignified expression. It was not because he was afraid of his opponent, but because he respected the wisdom that debate itself represented. At the same time, he also expressed a certain degree of appreciation for Xie Qingyun's courage. When the debate began, he showed no mercy and began to show his true level that was superior to his peers. Countless words flowed out of Prince Longqing's lips like beautiful lotus flowers around the topic of the debate. Countless classics of the predecessors were cleverly selected and organized by him, turning into a complicated and clear net. It often took the listener a long time to understand the true meaning. What shocked and speechless all the students present was that in this debate, Prince Longqing did not use the divine canon of Haotian Taoism in West Hill at all, but used the views of the Academy's classics. Just as Ning Ke predicted, before Prince Longqing's expressionless narration, Xie Qingyun only made a slight counterattack, and then he was caught in the sea of lotus flowers. He could not see any mistakes, nor could he find the slightest gap to fight back. He could only watch the other side weave the Taoist language net more and more tightly, and he had no power to fight back. Ning Ke was neither good at nor fond of such means of seeking truth from ancient books and metaphysics. When he was 4 years old, he found that the exercises he solved in the mathematical Olympiad class were of no help to his begging life. Since then, he had firmly established a life principle: no matter how wonderful and profound it was, if it could not be used in front of a knife or on the table, then it would be meaningless to his life, and there was no need to continue to study it. Well, calligraphy was an exception, because he loved it. In short, he did not like debating, and it was impossible for him to have a good impression of Xie Qingyun. It was difficult for a marginalized person who had been forgotten by the academy for half a year to have any sense of collective honor. But he did not want to see the handsome and hateful prince with facial paralysis continue to be arrogant. So he ignored what was happening over there and took Sang Sang, who also did not understand, to hide in a dark corner, drinking wine and eating fruits and vegetables, waiting for the moment to end. The headmaster of the academy once said, "If you don't change your ways for 3 years, that is the way." Prince Long Qing ended his speech with the conclusion of the headmaster of the academy 30 years ago, which also ended the completely one-sided debate. It was dead silent in the courtyard. All the students of the academy silently looked at the indifferent prince sitting in the middle of the table and did not know what to say. The girls, including Situelan and Jean Wuxia, all felt a little wet on their backs. Such a meticulous but sharp person was really terrible. What's more, he used all the academy's classics and finally used the headmaster's scripture as the anchor. How could they still have the face to pester him? At this moment, the crowd finally understood why Prince Long Qing, who was handsome and quiet and spoke little and gently, gave people an inexplicable sense of pride and indifference. This couldn't be entirely blamed on him for being arrogant. It was just that the people around him subconsciously felt that they were inferior in front of his great power. Over time, this talented prince got used to this way of getting along with others. Thus, he became the silent but proud person he was today. Before you complain that others always like to ride on your back, you should first consider whether you have taken the initiative to squat down. Ning Ke looked at his classmates in front of him, who were like frozen quails. He shook his head and said, "You are always so proud and unyielding in front of me, but today you are like a chicken after hitting an iron plate. How shameful." Sang Sang took the wine that he quietly handed to her and took a sip. She looked at the front and said, "It seems that Prince Long Qing is very powerful." As if to answer the little handmaiden's doubts, Priest Moli, the deputy head of the Revelation Institute, looked at the students of the academy and added with great satisfaction, "Prince Long Qing's way of debating is something that even the elders of the Lank Temple admire." The atmosphere was inevitably a little awkward. The middle-aged general from the Gushan commandery who was sitting on the lower left side of Li Yu suddenly laughed and said, "I, Zhang Jianqin, am a boorish man. I really don't understand what the prince and the child are talking about. But I know that any banquet must have wine to liven things up. Today, everyone is here to send off crowned Prince Chongming. I don't have anything good in the Gushan commandery, so I only brought dozens of bottles of Nine River double-distilled wine. I asked the captains to bring them to the backyard. Now, please have a taste." The Nine River double-distilled wine from the Gushan commandery was not an ordinary wine. It was a high-strength wine brewed by double distillation. This high-strength wine was used by an emperor of the Tang Empire to soften the minds of the grassland barbarians and corrupt the iron blood of the tribes. It had a miraculous effect. Since then, it had become a closely guarded secret craft of the Tang Empire. It was often used to bargain with the grassland tribes in negotiations and was rarely drunk by people. The reason why the Nine River double-distilled wine was rarely drunk by people and even the palace did not choose it as a tribute wine was not only because it was not easy to brew, but also because it was too strong. An ordinary strong man would be drunk after drinking a big bowl of it. Although the strong wine was in line with the fierce and generous temperament of the Tangs, they could only drink it in small mouthfuls when they thought that they were broad-minded. It would be too unsightly if they were drunk even a little bit. Therefore, the Tangs had to bear the pain and give up. The rare Nine River double-distilled wine from the Gushan commandery was divided into small bottles and sent to each table. Then, more delicate wine utensils were replaced. The previously oppressive and tense atmosphere in the courtyard eased a little. However, no one expected that the general from the Gushan commandery named Zhang Jianqin would ask the maidservant to remove the small wine cup in front of him and replace it with a big bowl. After filling the bowl with the strong wine, He stared into Prince Longqing's eyes and asked in a low voice, "I wonder if the West Hill Divine Palace forbids alcohol?" Prince Longqing looked at the small wine cup in front of him and shook his head with a faint smile. This was the first emotion other than gentleness and indifference on his flower-like face since he entered the courtyard. He exuded a charm that made the girls who were secretly against him because of the damage to the Academy's reputation feel dizzy again. General Zhang looked solemn and raised his left hand to hold the bowl with both hands. He solemnly said, "Back then, I had also fought with the Yan Kingdom's cavalry under Min Mountain. Now, nearly 10 years have passed and the two countries are as friendly as before. I would like to toast this bowl to Prince Longqing. I hope you don't mind. However, the Nine River double distilled wine is extremely strong. There has always been a saying on the grassland that one can't get on a horse after 3 bowls. I wonder if Prince Longqing can drink it. Do you dare not drink it?" As soon as these words came out, the courtyard became quiet again. In the corner, Ning Ke looked at that place and shook his head. He said, "Is this forcing or making a scene? Vulgar, really vulgar. The old and young men of our Tang military who have withdrawn from the front line are so honest, or should I say stupid. That prince is a big shot at the peak of the see-through state. Drinking with him is like playing dice with your young master. It's purely asking for abuse." As he spoke, he emptied the bowl that he had used to drink rice wine and poured a small can of Gushan Commandery wine into the bowl. Then, he carefully covered the bowl with his sleeve and handed it to Sang Sang behind him. The Nine River double distilled wine was indeed extraordinary. In an instant, the fragrance of the wine filled the air. Sang Sang, who was usually calm, could not suppress the joy on her face and her eyes lit up. In the depths of the courtyard, Grand Secretary Xing Jing found the scene boring and came to the rescue. He gently patted the folding fan in his hand and looked at General Zhang Jianxin with a solemn face. He said, "Since we have repaired the friendship, why don't we drink together?" The Grand Secretary's expression turned solemn. Even the Tang Frontier Army general did not dare to act rashly. However, somehow, Zhang Jianxin seemed not to have seen it. He still held the bowl with both hands and looked at Prince Longqing coldly. He said, "Drink together or drink with each other. I only have one question. Prince, do you drink?" At this time, Ning Ke took a sip of the liquor and frowned because of the spiciness. When he heard these words, why did he feel that he could only drink with one ladle of water? He frowned and looked in that direction. He thought that General Zhang had previously claimed to be a rough man, but it was probably fake. He deliberately used vulgarity to intimidate others and used his vulgarity to defeat the enemy's elegance and pride. In the current situation where the Empire's face had been repeatedly damaged, it was a strange move. Maybe it was secretly instructed by Liu. However, just like one of the two foundations of Prince Longqing's pride, what did these things have to do with Ning Ke? When he found that Sang Sang liked the Nine River double distilled wine very much, he was busy pouring wine from the wine can and secretly handing it to Sang Sang behind him. Then, he secretly stole wine from a classmate beside him and secretly fed it to Sang Sang. He repeated this tirelessly and carefully, and he was never tired of it. When the master and the servant hid in the dark corner of the courtyard and secretly drank the wine, the situation on the other side changed again. When many people thought that Prince Longqing would ignore the Tang general's invitation for a drinking competition with his usual indifference and pride, they saw a faint smile suddenly flashed between his picturesque eyebrows. He gently waved his right hand, and the wine can under the table quietly flew to his hand. Then, Prince Longqing's right hand turned the wine can upside down. The clear wine poured out with a pungent fragrance and instantly filled the big bowl. Before the wine really overflowed, he raised his left arm and brought the wine bowl to his lips. Like a whale sucking water, he drank the liquor in the bowl in a whirlwind. His movements were very natural and unrestrained. Zhang Jianxin, the general of Gushan Commandery, was slightly stunned. It seemed that he did not expect that Prince Long Qing, who was known for his pride, indifference and seriousness, would become so casual and natural in the face of his invitation for a drinking competition. After a moment, he woke up and remembered that he was still holding the wine bowl, so he hurriedly brought it to his lips and drank it. However, when he just held the wine bowl to his lips, he found that Prince Long Qing on the opposite table had already filled the second bowl of wine and drank it in a very natural and unrestrained manner. The third bowl, the fourth bowl, the fifth bowl. Even on the grassland, there was a legend that one could not get on after 3 bowls of the Gushan Commandery's 9-river double-distilled liquor. Zhang Jianxin dared to invite a drinking competition, so he was naturally a master of this. However, facing Prince Long Qing's calm and unwavering drinking, he finally could not resist and fell down with a red face. Maids and servants carried General Zhang, who reeked of alcohol, away. The Tang people in the courtyard felt very disgraced. It was extremely vulgar to invite a drinking competition, but in the end, it was drunk by this prince who looked like a figure in a painting. This was not only vulgar to the extreme, but also extremely shameful. Prince Long Qing held the 8th bowl of liquor in his hand and did not put it down because of his opponent's drunkenness. He still drank it slowly and then looked at the people in the courtyard calmly. With a trace of deep exhaustion, he said with a smile, "In my life, I first worked hard to seek Taoism, then I took charge of judgment, killing the remnants of the devil's doctrine, punishing the traitors of Haotian Taoism, and punishing the heresy. I have never been soft-hearted, and I have strictly adhered to the laws of the divine canon. I never allowed myself to make mistakes. Up until now, it can be said that nothing can disturb my mind, except for one thing, and that is good wine. Wine can connect the way of heaven and man, and can penetrate the mysteries. It is a gift from Haotian, so I have always thought that if I use my own cultivation to overcome the effects of wine, it would be a reckless waste of God's gift. I have been fond of wine since I was a child, but I did not drink it often. Since I left capital Cheng when I was young." He calmly glanced at his elder brother, the crown prince, who seemed to be forgotten by the people in the courtyard, and continued. "I have only drunk wine 4 times in these years, one of which was in the palace of Yueluan Kingdom. Because of Chen Jia, I was misunderstood by some people, and they fought with me in rounds of drinking. The wine was not as strong as today, and they did not stop until all the wine jars in the palace were empty. After that, the pillars in the palace still had the smell of wine for 3 days, but I was not drunk. Good wine is the most wonderful thing, and it is also a demonic sound that erodes bones. So I rarely drink, unless there is a situation where I have to drink, such as in Yueluan Kingdom, or today, when the general forced me to drink with the pain of the country." He calmly said, "Or there is wine worth drinking, such as this double-distilled wine from Gushan Commandery, or there is a worthy opponent." At this point, Prince Long Qing once again filled the bowl in front of him and raised it with one hand. He looked at Xie Qingyun in the courtyard and said, "This bowl is to thank the 3rd young master for your courage." Xie Qingyun was slightly stunned and sighed in his heart. He changed the big bowl to fill with strong wine and drank with him. Prince Long Qing poured another bowl of strong wine, looked at Linchuan Wangying beside Xie Qingyun, and calmly said, "Linchuan Wangying, you know etiquette well at the age of 12. I have read your notes on etiquette the year before last." Linchuan Wangying was only 15 years old this year, and was still a teenager. He did not know the reason for the open and secret fights in the previous banquet, and did not expect that they would talk about him. Hearing that Prince Long Qing had read his notes on etiquette, he could not help but feel excited and happy, and hurriedly picked up the small wine cup in front of him and drank it. Unsurprisingly, a moment later, Xie Qingyun and Linchuan Wangying were drunk because of the strong wine. But the 2 drinks were peaceful and joyful, and no one in the academy felt unhappy. Instead, everyone, including Zhong Dajuan, filled the wine cups in front of them and waited for Prince Long Qing to order them in order. Prince Longqing held the bowl of liquor in his hand and looked at the students in the field. He did not intend to propose another toast. Instead, he brought the liquor to his lips and drank it slowly. Then he put down the bowl and did not look at the audience again. The academy students could not help but feel a little awkward. Even Ning Ke, who followed the crowd in the corner and filled up the wine, felt very uncomfortable in his heart, and the little good impression he had for this guy suddenly disappeared. Prince Longqing looked at the empty wine bowl with a faint smile and sighed softly, "The academy is really famous. I only hope the real academy will not let me down. You really have a big tone." Li Yu looked at him with slight mockery and said, "If you don't know what the real academy is, how can you come thousands of miles to be a hostage? How can the hierarch lord and the 3 great divine priests be willing to let you, a bigwig of the judicial department of the divine hall, give up your job and come to the academy to be a student?" Prince Longqing was silent for a while, and then he raised his head and replied calmly, "Your Highness is right." Li Yu looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "Longqing, I admit that you are indeed talented and capable, and you have the right to be proud. But since you are in charge of the judicial department and know the doctrine of Haotian, you should know that everything is too much to be forced, and that everything does not enter your heart. Why do you have to go against your will and act so arrogantly?" Hearing this question, Prince Longqing was silent for a long time, and his handsome face gradually glowed. He slowly and firmly answered, "There is no solution to the poverty of the country, so I can only be more arrogant." He said this very calmly, directly and frankly, clearly stating that the Yan kingdom was weak and not the enemy of the Tang Empire. And as a member of the royal family of the Yan kingdom and a person of the West Hill, if he were to be a hostage in Chang'an, then he should be arrogant, so that he would not be weak because of the situation, and always remain strong. Prince Longqing continued, "As for not drinking, it has nothing to do with arrogance, but because I can't find anyone who can drink with me." Situelan could not help but whisper, "A man's ability should be on the battlefield, not on the wine table. What's the use even if you can drink more wine?" This lady's words make sense. Prince Longqing calmly replied, "Only those who are good at fighting can fight, and only those who are good at drinking can drink with each other. Since there is no fighting today, naturally there is no drinking." Among the young students present, who could fight with Prince Longqing? Xie Qingyun, who was the most popular in the academy, had already been defeated, so who could drink with Prince Longqing? He had already drunk nearly 10 bowls of strong wine, and he claimed that he was not drunk in his life. There was an awkward silence in the courtyard. The people present were shocked by the West Hill Divine Palace, and no one dared to challenge him. This was really an unbearable shame for the Tang Empire and the Academy. Li Yu's jade-like hands gently grasped the silk scarf in her sleeves. When she was ready to leave, she suddenly heard a gurgling sound from the corner. At this time, it was so quiet that even a needle falling on the ground could be heard. So the gurgling sound, which was originally very subtle, was suddenly magnified and attracted the puzzled eyes of all the people present. The sound was like a clear spring flowing through the waterway opened by Nanju and falling into the slightly icy mountain stream. It was also like a long-necked stork waking up from the wetland grass in the morning and proudly combing its neck feathers. It was very beautiful and attractive. Everyone, including Situelan, opened their eyes wide and stared at Ning Ke in the dark corner. They carefully listened to the gurgling sound coming from behind him and were somewhat puzzled. A moment later, Sang Sang, who was thin and dressed in handmaiden clothes, came out from behind Ning Ke on her knees with an empty wine bowl in her hands. Then she was shocked to find that she had become the focus of attention. She did not know why everyone present was looking at her as if she was a fairy. Sang Sang found that so many eyes were staring at her, and felt extremely uncomfortable. She raised her right sleeve to wipe her mouth, and carefully put the wine bowl on the table in front of Ning Ke, and then quietly returned to behind Ning Quebec. Until then, People found that there were 4 wine cans neatly placed beside the table in the corner. Note, I saw that sentence in Mu Fei's Weibo and quoted from Gigi, but I forgot the specific words when I wrote it. So, I strongly call for recommendation votes on Monday. It's not easy for everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.